Cities keep their memories in stone and glass, but the most dangerous archives are made of paper. Paper binds voices that should have been whispers, and sometimes it answers back. Welcome to Somnolent Conspiracies, where we read what was never meant to be written and follow ink until it bleeds. Tonight, we open a book that refuses to finish itself. The diary was found in a second-hand shop off Prague's Neradova Street. Its calfskin cover cracked like winter river ice. Its pages numbered with a neat, antique hand. Every page had a date, every entry a life. Market prices, trivial resentments, a servant's gossip, a priest's advice. It felt ordinary, almost painfully so, until the last numbered page ended mid-sentence and the next was left intentionally blank, as if awaiting an apology. Hours after the book changed hands, red letters swam up through the blank paper, not written from above, but surfacing from within. A scrawl that looked like capillaries forming words. The message described a crime that had not yet occurred, location, weather, even the smell of the stairwell. A student died the following night in exactly that place, under exactly that sky. The diary's page was crimson where the date should have been and dry to the touch, the way old blood grows patient. Our detective is not a believer in haunted stationery. She believes in chain of custody, in who held what and when, and in the arithmetic of grief. But a book that predicts death is an invitation to choose. Prove the future wrong or prove it inevitable. We are going to weigh coincidence against intention, watch fear become motive, and test whether foreknowledge saves anyone or merely tightens the knot. Settle in, listeners. Turn the page gently. If you see your street written there, read quickly, and then decide whether to stay home or meet what's coming. They found the boy where the river held the city like a cold idea. The stairwell cut down from the embankment to the water, iron railings slick with condensation, stone steps lacquered to a sheen by winter. 2 patrol officers waited at the mouth of the stairs, shoulders tight against the wind off the Vltava. When Detective Eleanor Vale arrived, the blue lights of the medic van pulsed against the underbelly of the bridge, turning the damp stone into a throat that breathed. Male, early 20s, the senior medic said, rising from a crouch. No obvious defensive wounds. Skull fracture consistent with a fall. We bagged the hands, they're clean. Eleanor looked. The body lay 2 steps from the bottom, as if he'd been careful right up until he wasn't. His student card had already been photographed and returned to the wallet. Mark Corin, Charles University, Faculty of Arts. There was a thread of blood at his hairline. It had not spread much. The river air took warmth and gave nothing back. She took in the geometry of the site. The top landing presented a blind corner from the street. The mid-landing cinched narrow. At the bottom, a short run ended in a stone apron and the river wall. No scuffs on the rail, no scrapes on the posts. Glass beer bottles congregated in a dark niche like a parish of cowed saints. Undisturbed. The city was loud, but in here the stairwell turned sound into a muffled confession. Who called it in? Eleanor asked. The younger officer, shivering irreverently, said, "Roommate." He and a bookseller came down to find him. They're over there. 2 people waited under the bridge arch in the half-shelter of the shadows. The man wore a jacket that believed in warmth without providing it. The woman, 40 or 50, had the attentive stillness of someone who had trained bad wind to pass by her without consequence. She held a book against her chest with both hands, the way a swimmer clutches air. Eleanor approached, badge visible, tone steady. "Detective Vale. Are you Stephen Hale?" The man nodded. "Yes, Mark's roommate. We live off Neradova. He..." The rest of his words retreated. "And you are?" "Eve Sharp," the woman said, voice even. "I own Sharp Curios and books." Her fingers tightened on the calfskin volume. "This is his. Or it was." Eleanor's gaze dropped to the book. The leather was the particular, exhausted brown of an object that had borne a century of hands. The spine had been cracked, remended, cracked again. A brass corner still clung to one edge. There was no title on the cover, just an impression where something had been pressed hard and long ago. "Tell me," Eleanor said. Stephen swallowed and started at the beginning with the breathless honesty of the frightened. They had been in the shop that afternoon. Mark had a thing for old paper, handwriting, marginalia. The shop on Neradova had a diary with numbered pages and neat entries in a clerk's hand. Quaint, almost comforting. Stephen had bought it as a joke present to get Mark to write something other than text messages. They'd gone home. Mark had gone out for a walk. An hour later, Eve had called Stephen back to the shop with a voice that made him bring his coat. She had found something in the diary. It had written itself. It did what? Eleanor asked, too dry to be cruel. Eve's face remained composed. The last page in the diary was blank when I priced it. When the shop was quiet, it wasn't blank anymore. The writing looked red. It described the stairwell, the river smell, cold seeping through stone. 3 breaths, a misstep, 2 steps, and then a line, like someone ran out of room. She glanced toward the body. I called him because he had purchased it. Stephen rubbed his hands together, then hid them in his pockets as if ashamed of their existence. I ran. I brought the book. Mark wasn't answering his phone. I came down here and... He stopped. Eleanor held out a hand. Eve, to her quiet credit, did not hesitate. She gave over the book with the care of one relinquishing a living thing. It was heavier than it looked. Inside, the paper was thick ragstock, edges deckled. The entries were a ledger of mundanity. Prices of flour, neighborhood gossip, the weather recorded with an odd, loyal attention. There were page numbers in the upper right. The last page was not the last page. There were stubs where it had once been bound into something longer. The enumerations stopped at 224. Past that, a field of white waited, and on that white, letters had risen in a color that had to be named before it could be seen. They were not painted on. The red lived under the surface, as if the page had been held briefly under the skin of something. The script had an antique neatness to it, each letter shaped with a clerk's care, but the lines were slightly wavered, as if the ink had migrated to where pressure used to be. Eleanor read, not aloud. At the riverside stair, damp as breath on a winter pane, a boy takes 3 breaths and miscounts his 4th. He thinks of a sentence he will never finish. His hand does not find the rail. 2 steps, stone, and none. There were details that had no business being written in advance. A smell of iron like coins. A halo of condensation on the 3rd step from the bottom. A fluttering plastic wrapper trapped in the corner like a trapped moth. The time, 1952. The wind, south-southwest, light, carrying heat from street vents. She lifted her head. Time of death. The medic, not far, answered without turning. 1952, plus or minus 5. Temperature readings fit. Eleanor looked back at the page. It did not gloat. It simply existed with an obstinacy that made her jaw harden. May I? She asked, already angling the book toward the CSI tech, who had been silently orbiting the edges of the scene like a patient moon. Gloves and swabs, the tech said. If that's ink, it's the strangest I've seen. The strangest you'll see, Eleanor corrected and motioned for the kit. Under the arc light, the paper gleamed dully. The tech took a tiny sample from the red script with an apologetic precision, as if afraid to interrupt the story. A heme test is cheap magic. A drop, a color shift, a verdict. The swab blushed positive. It's blood, the tech murmured. But, she angled a loop, adjusted, frowned. The fibers below are dry. No feathering, no capillary spread. It's like the letters were formed inside the sheet, not wicked down. Eleanor had seen men shot because of the weather and boys die because of stairs. She'd learned to file strangeness without letting it own her. Photograph this page, front and back, raking light. Full scene set. She turned to Stephen again. When did you last see Mark? 1730. He said he needed air. Stephen's eyes were raw, but they held steady on hers. He wasn't, he didn't, he wouldn't. He walked alone, Eleanor said. It looks that way. She gestured toward the foot of the stairs. There are no hesitation marks up top. No witness claims of shouting. But we'll check. She nodded to the officer who'd been mindful of the nearby CCTV pole. Get the footage from the embankment camera and the one looking down the steps. And audio if they have it. The officer jogged, grateful for instruction. Eve, who had remained quiet with the practiced humility of a person who understood when not to worsen an officer's day, spoke again. Detective, I need you to know that the page was blank before. I price my books carefully. I examined it. I don't dabble. Eleanor believed her, not because of her tone, which was clean of panic, but because of the way she had handed over the diary. People hoard what makes them money. She had given it up like a burden. Why did you buy it? Eleanor asked Stephen, gentler than it sounded. Because Mark liked old things that tell the truth, he said, and then flinched at the word truth. Because it was beautiful. The officer returned with a tablet and set it on a plastic crate. Eleanor watched the time-stamped footage. The street view showed Mark in his scarf, hands in pockets, head down, turning into the stairwell at 1949. No one followed. Time skipped to 1951. The frame shook as a tram crossed the bridge above. At 1952, the camera at the bottom caught motion. Mark stepping, a small miscalculation at the turn, the heel missing, the body pitching forward with the casual, evil inevitability of gravity. He hit the bottom like punctuation. There was audio. Since the camera watched the tourist rivercraft and sometimes captured rowdy students at the water's edge, the city had sanctioned a microphone. It didn't hear much over traffic, but it heard enough. In the seconds before the fall, a thin breath rode the tape, and with it a whisper that sounded like a word that had been written. Continue. Eleanor felt the shift in her own shoulders, the way a thought can add weight to bones. She played it twice. The second time she looked at the mouth of the stairwell. Nothing there but the city, patient. Ms. Sharp, she said without looking away. When did the writing appear? Eve consulted the ledger watch on her wrist because her phone was in her bag, and looking at a phone at a time like this felt untidy. At approximately 1930, I remember the church bells answering each other across the river. By 1940, it was complete. You called Stephen at? Eleanor asked. 1944. He arrived at 52. I was a minute behind him. Eve's hands had returned of their own accord to their empty shape, as if they still remembered the weight of the book. Eleanor closed the diary and felt the cold come off the leather, which scientifically made no sense and emotionally seemed exactly right. She slid it into an evidence bag with the extra caution people reserve for poisonous things that had learned to pretend. She wrote the tag herself. Item 1, Diary, Calfskin, Untitled, entries to page 224, anomalous script. She looked at Stephen. You're coming with us to give a statement. Bring the coat that doesn't warm you. To Eve, she said, you as well. You'll tell me about the acquisition, the pricing, any previous owners you can name. And you don't speak to anyone else about this. Not a soul. I won't, Eve said. I'm not superstitious. I am careful. Good, Eleanor said. Be careful twice. She turned to her team. Full scene documentation. Pull meteorological data for 19 to 2030. Humidity, wind direction, temperature. Compare to the page. She nodded at the bagged book. And call forensics. We're not treating this as just a fall anymore. I want comprehensive testing on that red pigment, heme confirmation, chromatography, fiber analysis. Everything. Start tonight. The river went on being a river. Above them, the trams kept their appointments with iron. The city breathed as if practicing for something. Eleanor felt the old arithmetic in her head begin to arrange itself. Boy plus stare equals grief, plus book equals motive yet to be named. She looked at the evidence bag one last time, as if it might fog. Chain of custody starts now, she said, and she carried the diary out of the stairwell like a lit match cupped against the wind. Morning broke like a thin apology. Eleanor took her coffee black in the squad kitchenette and read the initial notes without tasting either. The diary sat secured in evidence, bag numbered, logged, its existence already trying to ferment rumor. She kept the chain of custody form folded in her coat pocket as if it were a personal vow. First stop, Sharp Curios and Books, Neradova Street, where the hill runs steep and the steps of tourists sound like a rain that can't make up its mind. The bell over Eve's door gave a restrained chime when Eleanor entered. The shop smelled of sun-warmed leather and old glue. Eve had already set out an invoice ledger, a receipt book, and a shallow tray with 3 objects: a jeweler's loupe, a pencil shaved to a needle, and a pressed sprig of dark evergreen, flat as a drawing. "I thought you might want to see everything that touched it," Eve said. Her hands remained dustless, but she had tied her hair back as if to avoid contaminating history. "I do," Eleanor said. "Walk me through it." Eve's account was orderly without being rehearsed. A man had come in a month ago with 2 boxes from an estate. He'd introduced himself as Andrew Mallon, executor by blood and necessity, grandnephew to Father Joseph Mallon, deceased. The boxes contained parish pamphlets, gloves with the fingers worn through, a stack of church bulletins, and, in the bottom, the diary. The calfskin had been wrapped in a piece of linen printed with a barley motif, the kind of domestic relic that keeps a thing from being alone in the dark. "I did a quick look," Eve said. "Saw the numbered pages, the hand. Estimated early 1900s, rag paper, iron gall ink in the original entries. I priced it modestly. A clerk's diary is more artifact of habitat than trophy." "You examined the last page at the time?" Eleanor asked. "I did," Eve said. "Blank. Utterly. No watermark. No erased lines. I wrote the price lightly on the inside back cover in pencil. You'll see the ghost where I erased it when the writing appeared." Eleanor noted the precision of Eve's verbs. Appeared. Not wrote, not developed. "And the sprig." Eve touched the tray. "I found it pressed into the inner back board, beneath the marbled paper, when I rechecked the binding last night. It looked purposeful, not accidental. I took it out so the lab could test if needed." Eleanor lifted it with tweezers. The needles had gone the color of dusk. "U is a tree for graveyards and promises." She filed that under folklore and kept moving. "Any inscriptions?" Eve slid over a note card. Backboard, lower corner, faded, as if written with the dull end of a nib. "Write only what you can carry." "Who wrote it?" "Unknown. The hand isn't the clerk's." Too hesitant. Eleanor's phone hummed with a message from records. She ignored it a moment and watched dust in the window climbing the light like a cathedral climb of its own. "Why sell to students?" she asked. "I sell to whoever can read," Eve said, not pious, simply practical. Mr. Hale paid in cash. He looked like someone giving a friend an excuse to write down how not to vanish. Eleanor took the invoice copy, noted Andrew Mallon's name and number from the intake form, and closed the ledger. "Bag the sprig and that pencil. I'll have someone pick them up." Eve nodded. "Detective," she said, hesitant for the first time. "I've been in this trade long enough to know charlatans and accidental wonders. I don't want something in my shop that writes deaths. If you tell me to close for a week, I'll close." "Keep your door open," Eleanor said. "Keep your mouth shut." Eve's smile was a private thing that never reached her lips. "Both are old habits." Outside, Prague was all appetite and restraint. Eleanor walked to the parish office at St. Ludmila, where the square opens like a palm and the church lifts stone into a thought about verticals. The parish archivist, a man whose face looked copy-edited by decades of polite denial, brought out a leather-bound register and a cardboard box labeled Mallon, J, in blue pencil. "Father Joseph Mallon served here until 1971, the archivist said, sliding his finger down neat columns. "Retired due to a stroke." His notes are succinct. Succinct was not the word Eleanor would have chosen. Mallon's pastoral record read like a clock that had learned to write. Marriages, baptisms, visits, last rites, all recorded with a consistent, elegant hand. The box contained homily drafts, leaflets on temperance, handwritten prayers for good harvests during bad summers. And there, folded into a plain envelope, a clipping: "Factory fire in Versivis. 3 dead, 6 injured." Someone had underlined a paragraph about a safety inspection delayed due to a power outage. In the margin, Mallon, or someone who had adopted his economy, had written, "Warned? Too late." Eleanor paged further and found a casual mention in a 1969 bulletin of diaries and account books brought by parishioners for solace or destruction. She asked the archivist. He pursed his lips, rummaged, and produced a small, brittle notebook, the curate's notes from that era. A younger hand, sloppy with zeal, had written, J.M. counsels against letting the book speak. He says it takes what we say and makes it heavier. On another page, after the factory fire that Anna swore she saw in her husband's ledger, Father locked the man's book away. He says some pages know too much. People bring their grief to a priest the way they bring a fever to a doctor, the archivist said, rolling a pencil between his fingers. He applied poultices as he could. Where are Malin's personal effects? Eleanor asked. At his nephew's flat for a time, the archivist said. Then, he gestured to the box between them, we took custody of what pertained to the parish. A mental map stretched. Estate Andrew Malin, Eve Sharp, Stephen Hale, Mark Corin, the stairwell. The lines did not make a noose yet, but they knew how. She called Andrew Malin and asked him to meet at a cafe that had the decency to keep its chairs plain. Andrew arrived wearing a sweater that had weathered a decade of careful washing. He looked like a man who smiled easily and lately had not. I didn't hide anything, he said after the coffee arrived and had gone cold by one swallow. I inherited junk. I recognized the diary as something people might buy. I don't profit much as an executor. Why sell it quietly? Eleanor asked. Have you tried paying a plumber with a sermon? He said, then winced at his own tone. I'm sorry. I meant, my uncle died with debts I didn't know about. I did my best. Your best included not telling the parish you were selling a potentially sensitive artifact, Eleanor said. She kept it without accusation. She did not need him to feel small, only to feel seen. Andrew rubbed his eyes with his fingertips in a way that suggested headaches had become a hobby. He used to tell me stories when I was small, he said, about people who brought him words because the words frightened them. He said some words work like a pulley lifts. I didn't think he meant it literally. Did he mention a diary? Eleanor asked. He told me once he'd put a tongue to rest. I thought he meant a rumor, Andrew said. When I was clearing his room, I found the diary pressed between two floorboards, wrapped like food. I didn't read it. I don't read much, truth be told. Did you remove anything from the diary? Eleanor asked. Andrew blinked. No. Should I have? He looked genuinely puzzled. Eleanor recognized the difference between invention and ignorance. The former has choreography. Was there a clasp? She asked. A clasp? He frowned, thinking. There was a metal thing in the same box, a little hinge with a cross stamped into it. I thought it was a broken brooch. I tossed it in with my keys and then into a drawer. Sold the diary without it. The shop woman looked at me like I'd stolen a saint's tooth. I went back to find it later and couldn't. My cousin's kids had been playing pirates. Find it, Eleanor said. He swallowed nods like the coffee he hadn't. I will. Tell me about the factory fire, she said, sliding the clipping across the table. Andrew paled a degree. I was a child. I remember adults talking around it. A woman came to my uncle and said her husband's ledger had a page that turned red and wrote that someone would die in their factory. And then it burned. After that, my uncle kept a locked drawer. He told me some things don't want to be books. They want to be mouths. Eleanor paid the bill and left him staring into a cup that could not answer. On the walk back, she let the city's noises layer. Tram, bell, shoe scrape, the particular hush of snow threatening but not arriving. She thought of the inscription in the diary. Write only what you can carry. Who had written it, clerk, priest, victim, had known something about weight. At evidence, she signed the book out for supervised examination. Under the glass, with a sterile light that made everything look objective, the diary admitted more secrets reluctantly. There was, as Eve had said, a torn stub where a final folio should be. The tear was neat, the sort produced by someone who knew how to remove a leaf without wounding the binding. A binder's tear, not a thief's. On the inner back board, the penciled price had been erased. The ghost remained. Beneath the marbled paper where the U had lived, a faint indent spelled the inscription, Letters pressed, not written, as if somebody had leaned a sentence hard enough to leave a bruise. Bag fibers from the stub, Eleanor said to the lab tech. If we find the missing leaf, I want to know if it's the one. The tech nodded. You'll want this too, she said, sliding over a preliminary sheet. Heme positive confirmed on the red script as last night. We started chromatography on trace. Interesting result. No exogenous red pigment eluting. The color seems to result from iron in the rag paper itself moving under some stimulus, acidity, maybe a temperature shift. Yet it behaves like blood, Eleanor said. Here's the thing, the tech said, tapping a second line. We ran a DNA assay on the swab. It's degraded, old, smeared with time, but there's more than one profile in the mix. 5, maybe 6 partial signatures overlapping. Not a simple transfer. It's as if the letters are composed of layered donor noise. Noise? Eleanor repeated softly, thinking of churches, bells, voices, and the city's habit of speaking itself into fact. The tech added, also, SEM imaging shows microcapillaries aligning in the fibers, like veins deciding to become letters. If I were poetic, I'd say the page learned to bleed on command. Don't start, Eleanor said, though a part of her felt a grim, superstitious gratitude for colleagues who could still make metaphors. She looked at the stark, official printouts that proved nothing and everything. Chain of custody. Photographs that wouldn't explain a whisper that said continue. She signed the forms, returned the diary to its plastic windless weather, and paused with her pen above the line where only she, had to initial every movement of this thing. In the margin of her case notebook, she drew a small pencil line and then, without thinking, wrote the word stop next to it. The graphite had a humble look, a poor man's magic. Her phone buzzed. She answered without checking the ID. Forensics again, the same tech, a different voltage in her voice. One more thing, the tech said. We cross-referenced the partial DNA with available databases. Nothing clean, but the mitochondrial haplogroups in the noise cluster, some are local, expected. One trails to a central Bohemian line from early 20th century parish records. Another looks like a profile from a fire victim sample held over from a Versivis case. Not proof, just echoes. Layered donors, Eleanor said. Layered deaths. Layered speech, the tech said. Not sure why she'd said it and a little embarrassed. Sorry. Scientific of me. Eleanor ended the call and looked at the sentence she had written in pencil. Stop. It sat there like a door she hadn't decided to open or close. She thought of Francis Navertil, clerk, patient hand, recording the weather as if the weather needed company. She thought of Father Mallon, who had, if the curate's notes were honest, cut the diary's final page out like a tongue. Provenance, chain of ownership, a history of people trying to finish a book that refused to finish itself. She slid the case notebook back into her coat and stepped out into the hall. Down the corridor, the evidence room's air conditioner clicked, and for a heartbeat the vent's whisper sounded like something practicing a word and deciding not to say it. Behind her, the lab printer spat out one more line of conclusion. Multiple donors, genetic noise present. Layers consistent with more than one historic contributor, degraded. A sterile way to say it. The page was crowded. Eleanor walked toward interview 2 to schedule Andrew Mallon for a formal statement and to draft a request to the Archdiocese for any records of sealed items. Reliquaries, clasps, locks that might once have kept a book from being a mouth. As she reached for the door, the bells of St. Ludmila told the hour through the city, and in the quiet between their notes, she felt the case lean forward, as if waiting to see who would speak next. By noon, the diary had a lab of its own. Negative pressure hood, anti-static mats, 2 cameras on time-lapse, 1 on live macro. A small digital shrine to not being fooled. Eleanor stood behind glass while the forensics team moved with the reverence of divers. We'll start gentle, the lead tech Sarka said through the intercom. Document, sample, then environmental. Under raking light, the page returned its first confession. The red script sat subsurface, pooled along microscopic valleys in the rag. No feathering, no capillary creep. Sarka touched a pipette to a clean margin in a control area to prove the paper did wick fluid. Ordinary capillaries pulled water into soft fans. But the letters themselves were dry as doctrine. They took trace shavings from the red characters and loaded capillaries for thin-layer chromatography. A camera watched bands race up silica plates, solvent front like a merciless horizon. Nothing eluded at the red wavelengths you'd expect from exogenous dyes. The control sample from a known iron gall annotation split obediently into purple flaws and tannin ghosts. The diary's red produced no dye signature at all. So where does the red come from? Eleanor asked. From the paper, Sarka said. Rag stock retains iron impurities from manufacturing. Our working hypothesis: a local mobilization of iron into a pseudo-ink ferric complexes forming in situ. Something's acting like an acid catalyst. And yet your heme tests are positive, Eleanor said. We repeated with different reagents, Sarka said. Castle-Meyer, luminol derivative, tetramethylbenzidine. All three pop. Not strong, think whisper, not shout, but heme positive. Blood without blood, Eleanor said. Or paper that remembers being touched by it, Sarka said, and shrugged a scientist's apology for poetry. They moved to the SEM scanning electron microscope, where the paper's surface became a lunar field. Sarka highlighted a grid. Look here, microcapillaries in the fiber web align into channels. On blank areas, they look like random riverbeds. Under and around the letters, they kink and straighten, asterisk asterisk organized flow paths asterisk asterisk. Something guided the capillary geometry after the sheet was made. An external stimulus? Eleanor asked. Heat? Cold? Charge? Let's find out. They slid a dummy sheet from the diary's back, blank, numbered but unwritten, into an environmental chamber and copied conditions from last night's stairwell. Temperature drop, humidity rise, airflow pattern. A second blank from a different spot served as control, and a third went into a chamber that would ramp warmth instead of cold. Data recorders chirped like small birds trying not to be noticed. While they waited, a courier from behavioral sciences arrived with a psychologist in field boots and a cardigan armored with pens. Dr. Lenka Vachel nodded at Eleanor through the viewing glass, took in the cameras, the lights, the book, and removed her glasses to clean lenses that were already clean. I read your preliminary, she said. If this thing publishes predictions, we need to talk about self-fulfilling mechanisms before it turns your case into a broadcast. We're not releasing anything, Eleanor said. You don't have to, Vachel said mildly. Leaks are a kind of weather. The larger risk is contagion of expectation. You declare a scenario, anxious minds will navigate toward it. People make nearest fit choices. The city becomes a crowdsourced prophecy engine. We're testing the limits, Eleanor said, gesturing toward the glass. Vachel followed her gaze as Sarka adjusted the chamber. The temperature readout slid down. In the live macro feed, nothing happened. Then something did. The surface of the blank page did not darken so much as rearrange. Pale threads gathered like schools into lanes. In the space of a minute, the white looked slightly more deliberate, like a thought deciding on subject and verb. No letters formed. But under SEM, the microcapillaries had realigned measurably. Preludes, not words. Warming chamber shows nothing. An assistant called from the second rig. Control stays control. Sarka set the chamber to cycle, hold cold for 5 minutes, relax to ambient, hold cold again. On the second drop, a spectrometer flagged a spike at wavelengths consistent with ferric complexes in the upper micrometers of the sheet. Something's nudging iron, Sarka said softly, but it doesn't write content. It's like preparing a road without deciding where to go. The intercom crackled as another tech, Pavel, entered with a printout. We overlaid the entry completion time from last night with TOD estimates. The red script finished at 1949 to 1951, depending on segment. Mark Corin's time of death sits at 1952. That's a completion window within 17 minutes of TOD if you bracket the earliest visible letters. 17, Eleanor said. From 2 other historical cases the archivist sent, copied reports of a fall in 1968 and a tram strike in 1970. The diary mentions those events in marginalia, Pavel added. If those were genuine, the handwriting notes both say came early and finished late. The gaps map to under 20 minutes. Whatever writes, Writes close to the event, Vatchel said. Near enough to infect behavior. Eleanor pictured the stairwell audio, the breath, the whisper. Continue. A word said or a word harvested. She stored the question. Let's try electrostatics, Sarka said. Just to be obscene. They didn't dare touch the written page. They charged another blank from the same choir with a soft corona wand, measuring potential while a speaker pumped a sub-audible thrum to mimic city vibration. The paper's fibers flexed microscopically, but no script rose. Iron stayed iron. The diary sulked. Sarka looked almost relieved. Good. I prefer my monsters limited. A runner brought in the meteorological log Eleanor had requested. Actual stairwell readings matched the page's description to absurd detail. Humidity at 90% on the stone interface, wind registered light southerly near the bridge mouth, microtemperature dips from tram passes. Small coincidences toward a single mood. Let's test language, Vatchel said suddenly. We keep a witness room wired for stress speech markers. Put the diary there. Speak aloud neutral facts, then declaratives about impossible events. See if any pattern correlates to microcapillary shift. Eleanor weighed chain of custody against the chance to learn. We keep it in the hood under camera, she said. You talk through the glass. No one says anything they wouldn't want to meet. They rigged it. The diary lay open to the blank beyond the red entry, as inert as a knife in a drawer. Vatchel stood at the intercom, hands behind her back like a schoolteacher refusing to fidget. In the room is a table, she said evenly. The spectrometer drew a flat line. On the table is a book. Flat. Outside, a tram is crossing. Flat. She changed the tense. A woman falls. The spectrometer flicked, then quieted. A man will drown. A longer flick, damped like a heartbeat remembering itself. He jumps. The line twitched and held. Correlation is not causation, Sarka said, already drafting a control list. We need silence trials. Do that, Eleanor said. She kept her voice measured, but something in her chest had stepped back and found a wall to lean on. Speech as a lever. If the city's declaratives were the fulcrum, the diary might be the plank. Two interns argued quietly about the ethics of refusing to verbalize warnings. Their words found Eleanor's ear without her permission. Tell, don't tell, save, doom. She cut the thought with a gesture. No one predicts anything in this building, she said. We describe what has happened and what is. That's all. Sarka nodded gratefully and returned to certainty. Controls, repeats, better isolation. We'll run night cycle on the chamber, she said. Ambient dips, then cold pulses every hour. If it's going to write again, it will do it on its own terms. Eleanor checked her watch. The day had slipped forward like a chess clock. She had interviews in an hour and paperwork that expected to be believed. She leaned once more toward the glass to read the last line on the red page, as if it might have grown a postscript when she wasn't looking. The line ended as it had the night before. A long dash, like a held breath. Her phone chirped with a message from Dispatch. Tabloid blogger posting about the murder diary. She swallowed a curse and texted legal about suppression orders, then behavioral about media hygiene. Detective, Sarka said, voice gone careful. Eleanor turned. On the live macro feed, the first change appeared, not in the chamber, not under the wand, but on the diary itself. The blank beyond the last entry developed a faint pink underglow, like blush through porcelain. Threads gathered. The letters did not so much appear as become unavoidable. They rose with that same clerkly neatness, that same subsurface composure, and spelled, as if the city had cleared its throat. A woman in blue, glass in her hair, Vinorady 23:40. The lab went so still that the machines could hear themselves thinking. Vatchel closed her eyes as if to keep the words in. Eleanor felt the case spin on its axis and settle into a new slope. We don't announce, she said. We act. She was already moving, calling patrol for covert coverage on Vinorady's glassfront cafes, flagging ER intake for women in blue, instructing the duty officer to build a list of venues with floor-to-ceiling windows and late seating. She texted the night commander. No declarations on open channels. Observe, Intervene only on imminent harm. Phrase carefully. Asterisk asterisk. The diary rested innocently under glass, letters drying into permanence without ever having been wet. The spectrometer hummed its graph of iron, finding a reason to be read. Somewhere in the city, blue dresses and blue coats hung patient on hangers. The hour would come. 17 minutes, Eleanor said to no one, to everyone. We have more than that now. Use all of it. Vinohrady After Dark is a grid of lit aquariums. Glass-front cafes float along the avenues, each a small stage where couples rehearse the future over wine. Eleanor watched it all from a shadow that smelled like wet concrete and rosemary. Patrol units drifted in 2s and 3s, their plain clothes chosen for invisibility. Radios were turned down until they were more posture than sound. Her orders stood like ice in the bloodstream. No open declarations, no confident sentences on the air. They would observe. They would intervene only on imminent harm. They would name nothing in a way a book could steal. Blue, murmured Officer Radin into his sleeve mic, careful with his verbs. A person wears it, coat, outside Sova Cafe. Stays upright, no threat seen. He didn't say woman. He didn't say will. Eleanor moved along the line of shops. Blue appeared everywhere once you looked for it. A scarf, a coat, a dress in a window, the smear of a neon sign. She felt the human mind's eagerness to collude with prophecy. Dr. Vatchel, riding shotgun in Eleanor's unmarked car, watched the sidewalks with a therapist's patience. At 2340, the city expects to see a story fulfill itself, Vatchel said without moving her mouth much. Expectation is mass. Mass produces gravity. And gravity pulls glass, Eleanor said. At 2331, Radin's voice again. Inside Café Vostok, a blue coat, woman seated by the window. Table of 3 men behind her. They are loud and liquid. No hands have risen. Hold, Eleanor said. Watch the men, not the glass. At 2334, a different voice. Asterisk asterisk Hotel Julieta asterisk asterisk. Corner bar. Blue dress at the far end of the counter. Bartender polishes. Crowd in good humor. Street outside is quiet. Eleanor tabbed each report in her head. Coordinates, sightlines, glass surfaces that could splinter and assign words to scalp. She thought of the diary's line. Asterisk asterisk a woman in blue, glass in her hair, Vinohrady, 23:40 asterisk asterisk, and refused to let the syntax pick a target. A fight began without a plot at 2337 in a bar with brick walls and expensive beer. Men in a corner jostled wrong. A glass fell. Laughter spun up too fast. The knot tightened. The woman in the blue coat by the window looked up, then down, calculating her night. Inside, Radin said, breath thin with urgency. Shift from loud to violent. A shove approaches the coat. Move, Eleanor said. Without words, 2 officers glided through the door like weather. One placed a hand, not declarative, simply present, on the shoulder angled to shove. The energy spilled sideways into the police, absorbed and redirected toward the floor. It was a neat piece of choreography. A man who might have pushed didn't. A woman who might have fallen didn't. The bar exhaled. Someone paid for a round to restore narrative. Eleanor kept her eyes on the woman in the blue coat. The coat stayed upright. The glass stayed glass. Time? She asked. 23:38, Vatchel said. A siren cut the air from the next block. Not turning, just speaking of urgency somewhere else. The woman in the coat put on her gloves. She left the bar at 23:39, head down, the way a person leaves a possibility. The diary's line, imagined in Eleanor's mind as a wire, thrummed. Hold positions, Eleanor said. Eyes on all blue. Do not name outcomes. Copy, said 5 or 6 voices, each careful to be unmagical. The minute at 23:40 was long and oddly elastic. A gust of wind snagged a loose flyer and slung it across a windshield. A plate fell in a kitchen in the back of a bistro and broke with a sound the street could not see. A child laughed in the wrong place for the hour. Eleanor let each fact be only itself. The call came at 23:41, half a block from Julieta. Collision, Officer Janda said, voice tight. Taxi and hatchback. Minor, no fire. A woman in a blue dress exits the taxi. Head contact with the divider. Glass involved. Scalp bleeding. Conscious. Eleanor was already moving. She arrived to a scene cut from 1,000 Urban Nights. 2 cars at a surprised angle, steam making its own weather. A driver apologizing in 3 languages. A small crowd more interested than helpful. The woman in the blue dress sat on the curb with her knees together and her hands in her lap. Her dark hair glittered with glittering it had not asked for. Blood traced an obedient line down the temple to the jaw. In the streetlight, her pupils were clean and enormous. "Stay with me," Eleanor said, crouching to the woman's height. "Keep your breathing slow. You are present. You are not broken." The woman blinked like a metronome. "They said green," she replied, dazed but polite, as if believing someone had apologized to her on behalf of the color. Eleanor watched a paramedic work the glass from hair with the delicacy of a jeweler and felt the book behind her in the city close its invisible mouth around a coincidence. "Time of impact?" she asked the nearest officer. 23:41, he said, unavoidably declarative in retrospect. Taxi took the corner wide. Dress is blue. No concussion signs. "Do not say will," Eleanor murmured without looking up. "Do not say was meant." Janda bit back a habit. Understood. A uniformed constable, knew enough that his impatience had not yet learned to sit, said, "But we stopped the bar one. We forced it here." "Language," Vatchel said from behind Eleanor, appearing like a conscience in wool. "You prevented an event in that room. You did not force anything anywhere. You cannot know what the city's stress lines would have carried without your hand." The constable flushed. He would learn, or the book would teach him. Eleanor rose and stepped back to see the whole scene. Blue dress, glass, hour. The diary had been satisfied with nearest fit. Under the streetlight, the air looked like it wanted to snow and was remembering how. Eleanor called the hospital to flag the woman's intake, then sent a quiet text to the lab. Compare words on page. Do they deepen? She had the new entry sentence in her head like grit under a contact lens and wanted to know if its color changed when the city obliged it. At 23:52 a.m. message returned from Sarka. Yes. Letters darkened by a few %. No added words. Like it settled. Asterisk asterisk. Like it ate, the constable said before he could help himself. Like it recorded, Eleanor said, because she refused to let a book eat. We will decide when it feasts. They cleared the crash, took statements that did not editorialize, and watched the glass swept into a bag as if the city were tidying its stage. When the woman was in the ambulance, Eleanor stood for a moment and listened for bells that weren't ringing. The traffic light cycled through its catechism. Green, yellow, red. It gave no counsel. Rumor did not ask permission. At 0:03 a.m., tabloid site pushed a headline that used the word murder and diary in the same rectangle of language. Comments unfurled in a hiss: killers by book, witchcraft, fake news, save me next, please write me into riches, each one a small declaration offered to the air. Eleanor called legal. I want a court order to gag public dissemination of any material specifically about this object, she said. This is not public interest. It is public hazard. You'll get blowback, legal said. They'll cry censorship. Let them cry verbs we can live with, Eleanor said. I'll take the noise. She sent a second wave of guidance to patrol and communications. No confident language on open channels. Use description and conditionals. If approached by press, say nothing at all. Asterisk asterisk to hospitals. Flag any lacerations involving glass tonight. Do not mention color of clothing on intake. To your triage. Do not say outcomes when you can say observations. She was building a city of engineers where words could not pry as easily. Back at the lab, the diary lay under the hood like an animal that had eaten and would sleep until the next bell. The new sentence looked darker. Sarka was right, as if satisfaction had a tint. Eleanor stared through the glass until the red seemed to look back. Something in us tries to finish things, Vatchel said at her side, voice small with fatigue. We see a line and supply the next line. Your people did good tonight. You refused to collaborate. Tell that to the woman with glass in her hair, Eleanor said. She looked tired without admitting it. We saved one, and something found another. It found a other, Vatchel corrected gently. Careful with the singular definite. Careful with it. You don't know if there's an intentionality or simply a system that harvests declared certainty. Systems don't whisper, Eleanor said, thinking of the stairwell audio, the practiced sibilant of continue. Systems echo, Vatchel said. Echoes can sound like whispers if you really want to hear a mouth. Eleanor left the lab with the ache of a held breath between her ribs. In the corridor, she paused beneath a vent and took out her case notebook. On the margin, she wrote stop in pencil, the way a person knots a rope before night water. The graphite looked brave and domestic. On her desk, 3 messages waited. One from Eve Sharp, asterisk asterisk I didn't sleep asterisk asterisk. One from Andrew Mallon, asterisk asterisk I found the clasp, I think asterisk asterisk, and one anonymous, routed through a disposable number, sent at 23:39, 2 steps back. No context, no signature. She traced the time. 23:39. A message sent to whom? About whom? A line tugged at the shape of the night. She forwarded the number to Tech to trace if traceable. Then let her body sit a moment and be nothing but a chair and a human in it. Outside, Vinohradi's glass cooled into harmlessness. Inside, the diary waited for the next voice to offer it a verb to steal. At 0:27, the city exhaled a rumor of snow and did not produce any. In that non-snow, Eleanor drafted requests to court, to the archdiocese, to the station's media office. She moved each letter like a chess piece. She wrote instructions for covert patrols to continue 2 more nights. Protect without declaring. In evidence, a camera blinked in a patient rhythm. The book's last line held its dark like a swallowed oath. As the hour turned, somewhere unseen a bell counted. 1, 2. The lab audio did not capture a word. Captured a breath. The machines wrote it as waveform and timestamp. By the time Eleanor closed her laptop, the comment sections had already swollen into a kind of amateur liturgy. She did not read them. She thought instead of the woman in blue whose hair had carried glass like a new constellation, and of the other woman in the bar whose coat had remained immaculate because 2 officers had known how to stand in a doorway. She allowed herself a single, private, declarative sentence, spoken only in her head where no diary could hear it. We will make fewer words. She slept for an hour on the office couch and dreamed of windows that refused to break when told. Father Charles Hart still kept his tea in a tin that had once held biscuits. He brewed it with the patience of someone who had learned to time sorrow. The rectory parlor at St. Ludmilla smelled faintly of furniture polish and old homilies. A radiator ticked like a metronome set for confession. You knew Joseph Mallon, Eleanor said, declining sugar. Not just as a superior. He taught me to keep my mouth still when the city wanted a story, Hart said. His hair had given up and become white without apology. What is it you need, detective? A vocabulary, she said, and anything he left behind that he would have given me if he were still able to swear at what we're facing. Hart smiled with one half of his face, the other half remembering a different century. He rose, moved to a low bookcase, and took out a thin black notebook whose cover had gone velveteen with handling. He laid it on the table between them like a cautious animal. His, he said, the one he used when he thought he was fighting something that preferred paper. Eleanor put on gloves. The first page held Mallon's hand. Dated entries, sparse, clinical. She read one aloud. Asterisk to interrupt the book's appetite. Attempt as follows. Press you against the lower margin. Lean breath, not words, onto the inner spine. Write stop in pencil across the active area. Do not use ink. Ink gives it a throat. Asterisk. Did it work? She asked. Often enough to make him think it mattered, Hart said. Not often enough to make him think he was safe. There were more entries, small as hymnal notes. Do not announce what you fear. Do not read it aloud unless you intend the city to memorize it. Close it during bells. Teach people to say perhaps. Malin had left observations as if he were building a very modest dam against a broad river. He believed the book listened? Eleanor asked. He believed it answered, Hart said. Which is worse, a listener you can bore, an answerer is compelled. Eleanor turned a page and found a line that had been erased until the fibers bruised. The indentation remained. Faint. She angled the lamp to read it. A blessing promised is a prophecy if the parish believes you can keep time with heaven. She looked up. It predicted him, Hart said softly, as if the air could bruise. He told me in the sacristy. He'd been called to bless a child. The diary wrote that he would have his stroke during the benediction. He sat in the chapel for an hour and could not decide whether to cancel the rite and let something else pay or keep the promise and pay himself. What did he do? Eleanor asked. He did not give that blessing, Hart said. He sent me. I had no stroke. He came back and cut the book. Cut it? Eleanor said. He took a knife and removed the final page, Hart said. He folded his hands the way old priests do when they've learned to keep them out of the way. He said the page was the part that finished things. Without it, perhaps the book could suggest but not close. Did it help? For a time, Hart said. He lived another decade. The diary went quiet like a wounded animal. That is why I recognized your description when I read the report. Something has decided to finish again. Where is that cut page? Eleanor asked. Hart's mouth pressed thin. Somewhere I can reach if I must. He asked me to keep it sealed until a silence presented itself. He believed that reunions are doors. I have not wanted to open any. Eleanor closed the notebook and accepted that she had just added another knot to a rope that was already busy. You wrote stop in pencil in your files, detective, Hart said, not as a question. The detective's world is smaller than it thinks. That is one of his habits. He believed the graphite marked a human boundary. He believed it slowed the intention of the page. Ink is a declaration, he would say. Pencil is a maybe that refuses to harden. She thought of her thin graphite line in the margin, homely and stubborn. He left any other instructions? You breath pencil. And a thing about speech, Hart said. He saw it work. The city speaks with authority. The book collects that authority like an alms box collects certainty. He would forbid declaratives in the sacristy when the book was near. He would say, don't tell it what to be. It will try to help you be right. He called it the confession that confesses back. Did he treat it as demonic? Eleanor asked. Her voice made the word small, as if keeping it from getting the idea. Hart poured more tea for her without asking. At some age, the asking becomes a cruelty. He treated it as a problem of stewardship, he said. If you say demon, you give it a face and the comfort of an enemy. He refused to grant it personality. He gave it rules. Rules demand a toll? Eleanor asked. She remembered the bar, the taxi, the woman with glass in her hair, nearest fit. He nodded slowly. Every time he prevented a written harm, another line rose. Closer to him. It recalculated proximity as if he had moved the furniture of the city. It wants to be near the hand that defies it, he said once, half asleep. Eleanor felt the room draw in. The radiator ticked its tiny creed. Through the window, the churchyard yews held their winter shapes, disciplined and waiting. Show me where he kept it, she said. Hart stood with the dignity of a man who has rehearsed getting up. He led her down a corridor that had memorized priestly shoes. In the sacristy, he pointed to a cupboard with a brass latch. There, he said, we kept chalices, and for a season we kept the book between them, as if cups could teach a mouth manners. He unlocked it. The cupboard was empty now but for linens that had been folded by a person who considered folding a moral act. In the wood at the back, 2 grooves were darker, places where something heavy had rested over and over. I kept the clasp separately, Hart said. He called it a reliquary tongue, from a martyr's box once used to seal confessions. He believed it kept the diary shut in a way that doors understand without needing words. He gave it to you? Eleanor asked. He hid it in the binding. and later pressed it in my hand the way a father gives a key to a boy who is not yet brave enough to use it, Hart said. When the estate was cleared, it went a-wandering. You will need to fetch it back. Eleanor nodded. We have a line on it. Hart rested his fingers on the cupboard door, then withdrew them like someone refusing to touch a hot plate twice. Forgive me the pastoral reflex, detective, he said, but don't say what you plan to do with it. Not to me, not to your men. Not into your own ear if you can help it. Because the book harvests certainties, she said, hearing the city in her own mouth. Because speech is scaffolding. He inclined his head. You don't need faith to understand restraint. You just need to have watched a crowd decide itself. They returned to the parlor. Hart slid Malin's notebook into an envelope and gave it to her as if handing over a sacrament. Keep your pencil, he had written on the inside flap in his careful old man letters. She tucked it into her coat as if coats could be oaths. Father, she said at the door, did you ever hear it? The book. His eyes went out of the room and then returned. Once, in the vestry, I was alone. I had not been speaking. The bells began for a midday funeral. The wood remembered every other bell. I felt the air of a word turn over in my mouth like a coin. It was not language. It was a decision. I put my hand on the cover and breathed. The word didn't become a word. Breath, not speech, she said. He nodded. Sometimes silence must be active. She left him with his tea and his careful furniture. In the nave she paused where light made a habit of falling. The city's breath came through the doors with a little frost on it. She took out her notebook and wrote stop in the margin again. Not superstitious, simply obedient to a dead man who had fought a clever enemy with humble tools. Her phone vibrated before she reached the steps. Tech had traced the anonymous 23:39 text, asterisk 2 steps back asterisk, to a prepaid phone purchased with cash near the bookshop. A second trace, slower and less confident, triangulated the messaging history. Multiple warnings sent to a short list of customers who had ever paid with numbers enjoyed by spam. The purchaser, Eve Sharp. Eleanor stood on the church's shallow stair and let the shape of that settle. Eve, the practical bookseller. Eve, sending admonitions into the city like small, panicked exorcisms. Her coat pocket felt warmer suddenly, as if the envelope with Malin's notebook had learned the trick of a hand. She took it out. The paper was not warm. Her other pocket was. She drew out the evidence bag that held the diary for transport between secured rooms. She had not meant to bring it into the sanctuary, but chain of custody had required a detour, and her human reluctance to be parted from trouble had done the rest. Even through plastic, she felt a low heat under her palm, as if a kettle had been set to almost boil. Don't speak, she told herself, then realized she had just spoken. She swore, silently this time, and moved to the side aisle where a small table held votive stands and a pot of wilting rosemary left by someone who believed in practical saints. She set the bag down, unsealed it with gloved fingers, opened the book to the next blank. The page had that pale underflush she recognized now. The iron gathering, the city aligning its breath. She looked around for you and found none. Saint Ludmila preferred geraniums in summer and rosemary in winter. She cut a sprig with her thumbnail, pressed it hard against the lower margin, and leaned breath onto the spine the way Malin had written. She drew her pencil and, with the controlled terror of a person writing on a trigger, wrote stop across the lower third, the graphite leaving a soft barricade. Under the graphite, letters tried to rise anyway. Not sentences yet. Asterisk asterisk shapes asterisk asterisk, as if the page had decided what alphabet belonged to her. The warmth increased, and with it a feeling of proximity, the way you know someone you love has entered the room before the floor says so. She did not speak. She took the bag, resealed it, and carried the book out like a hot plate toward the cooler air of the street. By the time she reached the car, the first legible line had formed, single and terrible in its courtesy. Eleanor Vale, stairs/breath/stop. By late afternoon, the river had the gray of bad pewter, and the city had decided to be tired of itself. Eleanor took the stairs to Stephen and Mark's flat with the day's residue in her bones and a warrant in her pocket. Stephen opened the door as if expecting a delivery that would forgive him. "Did you sleep?" she asked. "I arranged objects," he said, which was not an answer and also was. Books were in 2 neat stacks on the floor. A cardigan lay folded like remorse over the back of a chair. He had placed Mark's mug on the windowsill, carefully aligned with a seam in the plaster. "Tell me about Adele North," Eleanor said. He flinched before he said the name. "Mark's XX until 2 weeks ago," he amended, the honesty tugging at him. "They tried again. She's energetic. Believes stories are structures you can climb. She runs a blog, Folklore, Urban Hauntings, debunking the debunkers. She said Prague is a palimpsest with a temper. Did she know about the diary before you bought it?" Eleanor asked. He hesitated like a man at a cold lake. "Yes, she sent me a link to Eve's shop last month. She knows I can't resist old paper. She said clerks' diaries often have omens if you read them diagonally." His mouth twisted. "She calls it skew reading. Find the phrase that wants to be a knife, she says." "Where is she?" Eleanor asked. "Her flat in Zizkov," he said. "Unless she's out skewing." Eleanor wrote the address down and let the silence fill in between them. The diary lay on her desk at the station. She felt its idea like heat even when she wasn't touching it. "Stephen," she said, gentler than the case allowed. "Do you think she wanted this?" "Not Mark. The attention." He bristled. It looked like love, which is not the same as defense. "She wants to warn people," he said. "She thinks telling is a kind of rescue. She thinks secrets rot." Eleanor remembered the tabloid comments sprouting like mold. "Telling what matters," she said, and let herself out. Adele North's building was the color of a bruise about to fade. Her door had stickers that announced a personality, festival passes, a small bright sigil that referenced a pagan holiday she had probably celebrated with a podcast. She answered in a black sweater the size of a lighthouse and hair that had been taught to look accidental. She assessed Eleanor in a quick slice. Cop, tired, unseducible. "Detective Vale," Adele said, as if she had already pronounced the syllables on a live stream. "You took your time." "You've been expecting me," Eleanor said. "I've been expecting anyone," Adele said, and stepped back. "Come in. Avoid the stacks. You're not the first person to visit who thinks books can kill." The flat had 2 windows and 10,000 words. The walls were crowded with prints of woodcuts. Saints, devils, furnaces, a mill that grinds men into flour, humor worn thin by repetition. On the table, a laptop open to a dashboard charting traffic spikes. On the floor, newspapers, a coil of twine, pressed flowers in wax paper envelopes, some labeled, some not. "You?" Eleanor asked, lifting a corner of paper with a gloved finger. "Among others," Adele said. **** Rowan, Hawthorne, Rosemary. ***, I collect what stories used to make themselves bigger. You is good for closing. Or so the people who wrote stories had hoped." Eleanor walked carefully around a pile to an alcove where a bulletin board had been repurposed into a map of the last 48 hours. Pushpins bloomed across the neighborhoods, stairwell, bar, hotel corner, connected by twine that had opinions about causality. Post-its annotated each pin with timestamps and fragments of sentences. Some had been underlined. A few had been erased until the paper wore thin. A smaller card near the bottom said, "Don't say it out loud." "You wrote that to remind yourself," Eleanor said. "I wrote it after I learned," Adele said. "At first I thought the only moral thing was to tell. If a line writes woman in blue, how do you not warn every woman in blue? But once you tell a city, the city tries to perform. I saw the thing behind the thing. I shifted tactics. By sending messages to individuals," Eleanor said. "Anonymous texts to warn. 2 steps back." Adele didn't startle, which told Eleanor that the only surprise left in her was death. "I bought a prepaid SIM so people wouldn't block me as a crank," she said. "I trawled hashtags for people posting near the locations. DM if I could. Text if their numbers were public from old shop ads or yard sale listings. Not tonight," I would write. Or leave the window seat. or 2 steps back. You sent one at 23:39, Eleanor said. To whom? Adele pointed at a column of names on the whiteboard, first names, no numbers. I don't keep their details once I hit send. That way, if I'm asked under oath, I don't complicate your job. But the river wall, I sent a batch to people geotagging the embankment. I tagged one Stephen because I saw his selfie with the line "Need air" an hour before. He lives near Neredova. The algorithm served him to me. I didn't know he was your Stephen until after. Eleanor absorbed the pronoun with a still face. I was trying to pull people away from edges, Adele said. I hoped the book would lose its nearest fit if the nearest fits moved. The bar? I posted from outside. Glass is impatient tonight. I didn't say who or will. I learned that from church. I'm not a believer, but I do go to funerals. Your blog, Eleanor said, nodding at the laptop's numbers. Adele saw the line of attack and met it with a veteran's brace. It drives donations, she said. Yes, I do rent and eat like mammals do, but I didn't invent this to raise my profile. I built my following by telling stories that aren't real. I don't want one that is. Your movements place you near each site, Eleanor said. Moments before. I was watching for harm, Adele said, impatient now. And in one case, she lifted her chin. I changed something. The man in the corner bar was set to shove. Officers stepped in, but I stood up first. The energy of the room shifted because I put my body in the geometry. Eleanor pictured the knot of men, the officer's hands redirecting a shove, the coat in blue staying upright. Or because 2 professionals made a choice, she said. Your body enjoys flattering stories about your body. Adele's smile was young and mean. Cops enjoy flattering stories about cops. They looked at each other for 3 slow breaths like duelists deciding whether honor was weather-dependent. May I see your notebooks? Eleanor asked finally. The ones you used to draft posts. Adele gestured to a stack bound with twine. Left. The top 3. Eleanor untied them with a lawyer's patience. The first pages held the drift of ideas. A cemetery that repeats names. A mirror that refuses to reflect the guilty. A short essay on roads that remember footsteps. Farther in, pencil notes dominated. Stop scrawled across margins. Do not describe in block letters. Breath only near a sketch of a book with a strap. You tried the Malin methods, Eleanor said, watching Adele watch her. I read about him in an old forum for retired sacristans, Adele said. The church keeps 2 kinds of archives, the ones with ink and the ones with instructions. I stole what I could. Truth wants to live. Sometimes it can be taught manners. You pressed you, Eleanor said, lifting another envelope. I did, Adele said. Sometimes it slowed the sentence. Sometimes the sentence waited until I moved my hand. Eleanor walked the room once more, letting her eyes collect what they would later sort. A tripod, a lav mic, a shelf of books on ballads and courtroom rhetoric, a heavy old paper press whose plate still smelled faintly of oil. She stopped at the window. The TV tower shouldered the afternoon like a patient giant. From here you could see the river if you believed in generous angles. Do you think I pushed him? Adele asked, and in the question Eleanor heard griefs need to be suspected. I don't think he was pushed, Eleanor said. I think a city of words became a slope. Adele nodded as if she had rehearsed both answers. Mark used to say I was soft on monsters, she said. He said I romanticized them with Latin names and folktales. He said real monsters have shoes and schedules. I told him names were how you learned what to starve. He came to the river for air, Eleanor said. He came to the river to rehearse a sentence, Adele said, with the authority of someone who had loved his throat. He always rehearsed out loud. He would say a thing the way a playwright lets a line walk around. Maybe the book heard him. Eleanor tamped that down. You are not to post about the diary again, she said. Not a photograph, not a story, not a clever phrasing. If you do, I'll ask a judge to find new verbs for what you're doing. Adele's hands rose and fell. There is a difference between incitement and warning. There is a difference between speaking and making a shape that the city wants to fill, Eleanor said. For the next 48 hours, practice breath. Adele laughed, and it came out cracked. You sound like a priest. I sound like a person who can read a graph, Eleanor said, glancing at the laptop's traffic. A knock at the door interrupted the rhythm. Eleanor signaled Adele to step back and opened it herself. Two uniformed officers with a warrant team stood ready, polite as expensive thieves. They moved through the flat in a choreography of drawers and photographs, bagging the notebooks with stop, the prepaid SIM packaging in the bin, the tripod with glass dust caught in a hinge. Eleanor watched Adele watch her life become evidence. While they worked, Eleanor's phone buzzed with a message from tech. Anonymous text history confirms multiple sends to random recipients near sites. Numbers burned after use. No direct incitement language. Asterisk asterisk another message piggybacked. Blog posts timestamped within minutes of events. Traffic spike correlates. Donations increased 40%. Asterisk asterisk the graphs didn't accuse. They described. The city would do the accusing if allowed. Adele walked to the door and leaned her head against the frame. Do you have it? She asked suddenly. The book. Chain of custody forbids me answering, Eleanor said. Chain of custody will not save you, Adele said, and then softened. But rules might. Keep it silent. Keep us silent. I can do that for 2 days if it saves one. She swallowed the tail of her sentence. Mark hated silence. He said it made rooms cruel. Silence is a tool, Eleanor said. Cruelty is a hobby. Don't confuse them. When the search was finished and the receipt signed, Eleanor stepped into the hall. The light there had the institutional yellow that lies about comfort. She looked down the stairwell, a sharper angle than the river steps, and felt vertigo pretend to be memory. Her phone vibrated in her hand like a nervous animal. It was evidence. Sarka did not waste prefaces. The page just wrote again, she said. Single line. Read it, Eleanor said, and already knew she didn't want it. Asterisk asterisk the man who watches the river. 2 steps. Then none. Asterisk asterisk. Eleanor closed her eyes and saw Stephen at the embankment. Coat zipped against weather. Profile turned toward water because air is easier near moving things. She felt the sentence try to decide him. Don't say his name, she said to the air, to Sarka, to herself. Send units. Quiet. No declarations on the way. She ended the call and took the stairs 2 at a time. Adele stood in the doorway with her hands pressed to her mouth like a parishioner who had finally learned the difference between prayer and breath. Don't post, Eleanor said without turning. I'll shut everything, Adele whispered, which was the first time her voice had understood the weight of that verb. The river drew them like metal feels the earth. The sky had decided on dark. Somewhere bells prepared their hours. Eleanor drove without narrating because narration is a trap, and because a book somewhere had learned to eat verbs that sounded like futures. The embankment at night is a long decision. Lamps curve along the river like a necklace waiting for a throat. Eleanor parked 2 blocks away and walked fast enough to make the air change shape around her, careful not to say anything her own breath could memorize. Patrol had already spread like dark sugar along the wall. Plain clothes, hats pulled low, eyes facing water. None of them stood in the obvious places. A thing that watches for prophecy learns to watch the frame. Positions, she said into the throat mic. The consonants sanded down. Observe. Intervene only if a body meets a body. Avoid names. She found Stephen by the rail where students vaped when they wanted to look untroubled. He had chosen a spot just upriver of a cleat where tourist boats tie their hopes. His breath made little clouds that looked like small arguments. He had his hands in his pockets and the posture of a man who believes the river can teach him to be still. Stephen, she said, from 3 meters away, enough to give him denial if he needed it. Walk with me. He turned and made the shape of a smile without the action. You're here, he said. I thought, never mind what I thought. Don't think in declaratives, she said. Think in weather. He laughed once. Is it going to snow? Perhaps, she said. Don't check. He matched her pace. They moved parallel to the river, Not along the wall, but a step inland where the stone paving didn't try to hurry your feet. She felt the alertness of the officers around them like a muscle flexing in a room you weren't in. They were good. They knew how to be furniture. I came out because staying in felt like telling the ceiling a story, Stephen said. I thought if I touched the air, I would be safer from the... He didn't finish the sentence. He did not say book. Perhaps he had learned. A bicycle bell trilled behind them, small and polite. A tourist couple walked arm in arm, the man's scarf bright enough to be a target. The river carried fragments of conversations from the bridge overhead. A weather report, a joke, a complaint about boots. Eleanor kept her eyes on the part of the walkway where a misstep would make 2 steps become none. The message came at 21:13, her phone buzzing in her pocket like a frightened bird. She looked because not looking is also a choice, and choices shape rivers. The text had no name, just a number that looked like it had been born that afternoon, 2 steps back. The timestamp made velocity, sent seconds ago. Her first instinct was to crush the phone into the river and rename the act a prayer. Instead, she lifted it so Stephen could see. This came to me, she said, rehearsing the neutrality in her mouth. Did you get one? He blinked, then nodded. Yes, 2 minutes ago. Same phrase. His voice made the words tinier, as if small trains run on small rails could not pick up speed. Delete it, she said. Don't obey text. Obey ground. He nodded again, but the body sits near its previous ideas, and she watched his shoulders shift toward the rail. He had been told by a rectangle of glass to step back. The human animal does not enjoy disobedience. The instruction hummed in him like a tuning fork finding a note. Stay with me, she said, and laid 2 fingers on his sleeve. Not a command, an anchor. Behind them, farther downriver, a bicyclist coming too fast clipped a man turning out of a conversation. The man, the tourist with the bright scarf, stumbled forward, arms pinwheeling not for balance but because bodies dream of flight. His heel met the lip of the last stone. His other foot searched and found a step that wasn't there. 1 step, 2, then none. He went over the wall with a sound like a word swallowed. Left, Eleanor said, and the 2 nearest officers were already there, not narrating, turning movement into rescue. A grappling pole bit the river like a harpoon. The tourist surfaced with the river's black hand on his head, mouth making the first, shocked oath in whatever language he had brought to Prague. A second officer threw a line that lay perfectly along the water until the man's fingers learned it meant staying. Eleanor did not let go of Stephen until the paramedics arrived and turned the night into competence. She watched the tourist cough out the river, the bright scarf attempting to remain bright. His partner clutched the wall and made small, furious agreements with gravity. The bicycle lay on its side, while spinning with the mindless optimism of machines. Time, she said softly. 21:14, Raiden answered. Man pulled from water at 16. In her mind, the book sentence, asterisk asterisk, the man who watches the river. 2 steps, then none. Asterisk asterisk, rearranged itself like a polite murderer adapting to a new schedule. It had not been Stephen. It had been a man. The book took the nearest fit. Nearest fit, she said aloud before she could stop the words and hated her mouth for collaborating. Stephen crouched and put his head in his hands like a person holding a small animal that had stopped. If I hadn't come out. No, she said, and pressed her palm between his shoulder blades like a priest who has learned the economy of touch. Look at me. There is no if that makes you the river. He lifted his head. He looked like a man who had been issued a different life and wasn't sure where to put it. I got the message, he said. I almost obeyed it. She showed him her phone again. 2 steps back. So did I, she said. We're going to find the sender. She signaled to Tech. The number was already trying to die. Prepaid SIMs learn suicide young. Signals triangulated along the embankment and then landed, stubborn as a moral, on Narodova. It wasn't a place so much as an intention. A follow-up ping drifted to a square near Eve Sharp's shop. Eleanor filed it where anger lives when it is learning patience. The tourist, wrapped in silver blanket, nodded as he answered questions being phrased as observations. No one said nearly drowned. No one said lucky. A medic said present, pulse, breath, the liturgy of not inviting endings. Eleanor walked Stephen away from the water, past a statue that had learned to keep its counsel, and sat him on a low wall that didn't end in river. Breathe, she said. Count the stones until the world cares less. He did. The counting put habitation back in his face. She texted the hospital to expect one male, mild hypothermia, and left out what he had almost been. Her phone buzzed again. The lab. The page, Sarka said. Asterisk asterisk completed asterisk asterisk. The line darkened. No change in wording. It started forming 10 minutes before your timestamp and finished 17 minutes before rescue. 17, Eleanor said, and the number stopped being a number and became a habit. We also traced that prepaid, Sarka added, because labs have friends. Bought near Malostranska. Buyer on camera in a knit hat and a coat that believes in rain. We think it's Eve Sharp. Eleanor closed her eyes and saw the way Eve held books, like hot plates or babies. She's trying to save people, she said, and tasted the grit in the word save. Her texts might be steering, Sarka said. Hard to prove, easy to fear. Eleanor opened her eyes to the city and felt for a moment like she could hear it behind the cars and the river. A murmur, too low to be language, like would remembering that it had been a tree. She put a hand on Stephen's shoulder again because it had worked once and the body likes patterns. We're going to take you home, she said. You're going to practice silence. Tomorrow, you will tell me everything you and Mark rehearsed out loud when you thought no one cared about your sentences. He nodded. I can do today. I don't know about tomorrow. Tomorrow has earned less confidence than it pretends, she said. We'll revise it later. They drove him back with the hush you used to carry a fever. On the stairs to his flat, he stopped and looked at the wall as if it might have advice. It did not. Inside, he arranged the same cardigan and the same mug and did not admit that doing it is a spell. When she stepped back into the corridor, the world had shifted 1/2 degree. She could feel it at the base of her skull where certainty nests. Her phone trembled. Another message from Evidence, shorter this time, as if the diary were learning texting manners. It was a new line. It had written itself with the same clerkly neatness, the same subsurface red, and carried the ugly pleasure of specificity. The seller returns what she cannot keep. Eleanor looked at the words until they stopped being words and became an appointment. Then she went to find Eve Sharp. Eve Sharp's bell gave its dry little chime when Eleanor entered, as if the shop had learned to apologize for news. Eve stood behind the counter with her hands folded like a person about to confess to something that wasn't exactly a sin. The line, Eve said before Eleanor could speak. It wrote about me. It wrote seller, Eleanor said. Language keeps itself deniable. Sit. They sat among spines that had practiced not telling. Eleanor laid a legal pad on the counter and drew a line through the center like a river. On the left she wrote hands, on the right hours. Chain of custody, she said. Say the names. Say the times. We will not say predictions. Eve nodded once, as if lending her head to a ceremony. Asterisk asterisk Father Joseph Mallon asterisk asterisk kept it in a rectory cupboard, she began. Until his stroke, until retirement. After his death, Andrew Mallon pulled it up from floorboards like a secret he didn't want but couldn't afford to keep. Andrew me, 3 weeks ago, late afternoon, he sold a box of parish detritus including the diary. Me Stephen, yesterday, 1707. Stephen Mark, shared possession, 1800 hours. Mark River, 1949. Then you. Then me, Eleanor said. She wrote. Evidence Lab, Night Cycle. The pen made a sound like a small leash. What about the clasp? Eleanor asked. Eve looked at the corner of the counter where the varnish had gone thin. She reached into the pocket of her cardigan and set a tiny paper packet on the wood. It was folded in the precise, old-fashioned way apothecaries prefer. The packet's weight was almost nothing, but the counter understood it. I found this in the book spine the day I priced it, she said. It slid out when I flexed the hinge. I thought it was a charm, pretty, nothing. I kept it in my pocket like a stone for hands that forget themselves. When the page wrote blood, I took it out and held it and understood I had kept a lock. Eleanor breathed through her teeth and kept her voice neutral. You didn't mention it. I did not, Eve said. I have no excuse that doesn't sound like a woman planning to keep a ring that isn't hers. I thought, if I told you, you would take it, and if you took it, the book might open. It is already open, Eleanor said, but the anger sat down. She unfolded the packet with glove tips. A small bronze clasp lay inside, thumb length, a hinge with a tongue. A cross worked low into the metal the way a craftsman puts faith where he touches it. It had the sheen of something that had been warmed by oils, pocketed often. Along the underside, a faint relief. A tiny jaw with squared teeth, as if the cross kept a mouth from closing. Eve watched her with the brittle dignity of the recently correct. I sent warnings, she said, offering the other confession before it could be asked. I am the number that told you 2 steps back. I wrote many such little liturgies. I did not say who. I did not say will. Your warnings may have steered a harm toward a nearer fit, Eleanor said. We can't know. We can only act better next. Eve nodded, which is why I brought the lock and the phone and my mouth. She pushed a prepaid handset across. You may keep them shut. Outside, the street's winter light gathered itself into the hour. Eleanor took the packet and the phone and the mouth and drove them to the station in a quiet that felt like rules. In the lab, Sarka already had a fresh set of ghosts on paper. You asked for environmental correlations, she said, pointing to a scatter of graphs that wanted to be argued with. We pulled city utility logs, the diary's historic appearances, from the curate's notes and any rumor with a timestamp, cluster near cold snaps and brief blackouts. And this, during our night cycle tests, every time the church bells at St. Ludmila tolled, the electrostatic field around the diary spiked by a fraction. The page is a bad antenna. Bells make it worse. Resonance, Eleanor said. Wood, stone, metal, and breath. We set an accelerometer by the spine, Sarka continued. The bell peals carry through the structure. It's not loud, but it's coherent, enough to shake microcapillaries into order the way a song can persuade a crowd. We're not saying causation. We're saying conditions. Conditions matter, Eleanor said, thinking of bars, fights, coats, glass, and the way a city listens for its own name. She placed the clasp under a camera and the metal looked back with a long patience. Under magnification, the cross was worn where a thumb might have found it in fear. Along the hinge, a crack of old solder shone like a healed scar. On the interface, someone had scratched 4 letters with a pin. Serif.m. Malin's initials reversed, Sarka said. Or someone else's prayer. Father Charles, Eleanor said. Asterisk asterisk F asterisk asterisk Ather M. Allen. Or Francis Navertil if you're poetic and don't know about surnames. She didn't like guessing out loud. She wrote it in pencil instead. A message from CCTV analysis came in at the speed of coffee. Eleanor opened it. Stills from a week ago showed Andrew Malin loitering across from Eve's shop at 8:14 and again at 11:50 the day the diary resurfaced online. He looked like a man waiting for a bus, which is the posture every camera understands. Eleanor called him in. He arrived with a sweater that had foregone buttons in favor of resignation. He looked at the clasp sitting on the evidence tray as if it were an heirloom he'd never thought to ask about. You didn't tell me about this, she said. I forgot it existed until just now, Andrew said, an honesty that ran faster than his guilt. I took it from the rectory because I take everything that looks mislaid. I meant to return it and lost it between drawers. Then I remembered and couldn't find it. I'm not a good thief. I am a poor steward. What is it? Eleanor asked. My uncle called it a reliquary tongue, Andrew said. He would put it on the book and say, let the confession keep itself. He told me it came from a box that held a martyr's bone, and that things which seal sacraments sometimes know their work even when unemployed. Eleanor felt the case tilt toward a midnight she didn't like. You were outside the shop the day the diary came into stock. I thought to buy it back, he said simply. I sold it cheap and woke up feeling poorer. I hope to return something to the church in an act of retroactive goodness. I did not go in. I watched tourists instead. I thought the city might notice me being better. She let the little speech sit. The lab's camera took another photograph of the clasp as if it could tire it out. Inspector, Sarka said from the hood, voice changing shape. The page just moved. Eleanor crossed to the viewing glass. On the blank beyond the last line, a new sentence was rising under the graphite barricade she had drawn at the church, the red pushing around the word stop with a child's stubbornness. It wrote slowly, as if dragging its feet to the curb where a bell would meet it. The clasp returns, and with it a door. Midnight. Asterisk asterisk. The lab made the sound groups make when a door swings open that no one touched. The clock on the wall was not yet evening. The sentence gave them a time like a recipe. No one says plans, Eleanor said. No one narrates the thing that won't happen. We will not give the city a script. She texted Father Hart. Asterisk, we have the clasp. The book proposes midnight. We need your room, not your words. Asterisk, his answer arrived like an old man walking quickly without showing it. Asterisk, the sacristy is ready. Bring breath and pencil. Bells will not do what bells want if we stand in the way. Asterisk. Eve sat on a bench outside the lab with her hands in her pockets, as if they were birds she was keeping warm. Eleanor showed her the sentence. Eve's jaw set, then loosened. I will come, Eve said. I brought it out of the spine. I can put it back in a way that says enough. You will come, Eleanor said. You will not say what you intend. Eleanor turned to Andrew. You as well. If reunions are doors, we decide which side we stand on. Andrew nodded, chastened into usefulness. And Adele, Eleanor added, which tasted like admitting wind. She called the number she should have been pleased to forget. Adele answered on the first half ring, the way people answer after they've been taught what night can do. You need me to keep silence, Adele said, skipping hello. And you need me to witness if it turns into speech. I can do either. You will watch, Eleanor said, and you will keep anyone outside from becoming mouth. At 1700 hours, she drafted a memo with the bureaucracy's ugly grace. Temporary order, communications protocol. During the hour around midnight, all city channels avoid declaratives about locations, doors, bells, clasps, books, STA. RS. Use conditionals and descriptions. Hold a minute of silence on the hour across participating parishes and patrol zones. Hotlines to avoid will constructions. She had legal stamp it with a seal that understood the difference between theater and law. She walked the memo to the duty sergeant herself, then to dispatch, then to the 3 officers who would man the cordon around St. Ludmila. She did not speak about doors. She spoke about boundaries. At 2200 hours, the temperature dipped 2 degrees like a throat clearing. The lab's accelerometer pricked its ears at the church's rehearsal chimes. The diary lay under the hood like a patient shedding its pulse. The clasp sat in its packet, the little bronze jaw ready to remember it was a tongue. Eleanor gathered Eve, Andrew, and Adele in the hallway. She handed each a pencil like a candle because sometimes a tool is in the ritual and sometimes the ritual is the tool. At midnight, she said, careful to keep the word hollow of promise. We will be where we should be. We will do less than we want and more than we like. We will not declare an ending. We will close what can be closed. The city leaned in, the way cities do when they smell a story assembling itself. The bells waited, each a mouth with brass teeth. The page had given them a clock. Eleanor refused to give it a stage direction. They stepped into the cold. The street tasted of iron and rumor. Over the rooftops, the dark had the heavy look of a theater before the overture. Eleanor touched the envelope in her coat where Malin's notebook lay and, in the margin of her mind, wrote one more unassuming barricade. Stop. St. Ludmila kept its shape against the night like a hand raised to quiet a room. The square lay emptied of its ordinary theater. Patrol had cordoned the approaches with a choreography that looked like nothing at all. Eleanor crossed the nave with Eve, Andrew, and Adele in her wake, Father Hart waiting by the sacristy door as if he had been set there by an old instruction. Bells in 9 minutes, he said, low and practical. Do not give them work. They moved into the side chapel, a narrow, tiled room with a table that had known chalices, a cupboard that had remembered the diary, and a thin draft that threaded the air like an usher. Eleanor set the evidence case down, opened it with the slow care of someone defusing manners, and slid the diary onto the linened table. She laid Malin's pocket notebook beside it. Its graphite instructions looked almost shy. Eve produced the U she'd brought in a brown paper sleeve, needles dark as old ink. Andrew stood back with his hands clasped in front of him, a boy in a grown man's sweater waiting for a grade. Adele had a camera bag and nothing switched on inside it. Father Hart placed a small glass of water next to the book the way a host sets a courtesy at a stranger's place. "Breathe," he said, to all of them, a pastoral imperative. The diary looked as it had in the lab, calfskin dulled by years, the faint burnish along the hinge where hands had counted time by opening and shutting. The clasp sat on the cloth in its folded packet, the small bronze tongue peeking like a word testing air. Eleanor opened to the blank beyond the last red line. The page was already waking. Not letters. Not yet. A pale underflush, the way porcelain shows warmth from within when touched. She felt the low electrostatic roughness she had learned to notice, a knowledge she wished on no one. She placed the U across the lower margin, angled like a bar against a door. She leaned a slow breath into the spine and imagined air filling a hinge. Then she took her pencil, the same blunt soldier she used to barricade margins, and drew stop across the bottom third, graphite dull and calm. "Hold," she said. The order was as much for her hands as for her people. They waited. 6 breaths, 8. Somewhere beyond the walls, a car turned a corner and decided against it. The minute hand on Eleanor's watch moved like a very small tide. The bells began. Saint Ludmila's hour is not timid. Metal shuddered from the tower into stone. Stone passed it to wood. Wood passed it to air. The sound reached the page like a persuasion. Under the graphite, the threads of the rag gathered. And then, as if the city had decided to say a name regardless of who had asked, letters rose. Clerkly neatness, subsurface, composed, Eleanor Vale, stairs/breath/stop. It wrote her down with a courtesy that felt like malice teaching itself etiquette. Adele's breath hitched. Father Hart's fingers found the cross at his collar and then disciplined themselves away. Eleanor did not move her hand from the pencil. She thought of the river stairs, of her own lungs, of the graphite line she had drawn. She wrote stop again, bigger, cutting across her name until the O sat over the O of Eleanor like a dull halo. The red letters buckled, broke around the graphite, reformed, and tried to clot through. She pressed her palm flat on the upper margin. *** breath, not speech ***, and let the air move from her into the paper without offering it a word to steal. The clasp heated. Bronze learned temperature like a memory. Eleanor lifted it by its edges and felt the warmth climb into the glove. The little jaw along its underside looked almost animated in the bell light, teeth squared, tongue ready to make a shut. "Now," Father Hart said, not as command but as accompaniment. Eve stepped forward and set her hand on the cover to keep the book from deciding to be elsewhere. Andrew held the packet paper ready like a dressing. Eleanor fitted the clasp across the foredge where a strap might have run a century ago. There was no mating hardware, no keep, but the hinge bit the leather with an old, remembered certainty. She pressed until the bronze branded the calfskin faintly, a cross low and discreet, a jaw's seam along the edge. The page fought in the only way it could, by writing faster. Under the graphite, around the U, the red hurried to finish its sentence. ***breath/stop flickered, then ***brie, as if something were being held at the back of a throat. "Close," Eleanor said. "Not a prophecy, a verb about hands." Eve folded the cover down. Andrew slid the packet paper under the clasp's hot mouth to keep it from gluing flesh to faith. Father Hart laid 3 fingers on the top board and leaned breath, not blessing. Adele, who had learned humility this week with the speed of fire, stepped back and did nothing at all with a conviction that read as courage. The bells finished their count. In the quiet after, the book made a small sound. Leather contracting around brand, heat settling. The page they could no longer see stilled. Eleanor lifted her hand. The silence was not absence. It was activity under glass. She waited for the groan she didn't know she was waiting for until it came. It came from the stairwell at the south transept, an old flight of stone that led down to the crypt and the boiler room and an accretion of parish junk. The noise wasn't weight exactly. It was what weight does to old things that have learned to keep their noises dignified. A single step shifted, stone against stone with a patient scrape, then settled as if something had taken one less breath than it planned. Eleanor nodded at two officers. They moved like men who had been told they were furniture. She and Father Hart followed with a pace that told panic it wasn't invited. The staircase lay under a sconce that had pretended candlelight since electricity taught churches embarrassment. The bottom landing was empty. A coil of extension cords sat in the corner like a sleeping animal. The air smelled of dust and clean cold. "Nothing," one officer said, and then bit his lip as if the word might write itself somewhere. Present ***, Eleanor corrected softly. "Nothing declares too much." Back in the chapel, the book lay quiet under the clasp. The cross imprinted faintly into the darkening leather, the line of the tiny jaw resting against the foredge like architecture. Eve put the back of her hand near it and then withdrew, uncertain whether she hoped for heat. "What now?" Andrew asked, and the words had the terrifying innocence of people who haven't learned to fear now yet. "Now we don't," Eleanor said. "We take it to the vault. We keep it shut. We let the city practice without a prompter." Father Hart exhaled through his nose, a priest's version of swearing. "I'll prepare the vault," he said, already moving the way old men move when duty hands them a lighter chair than grief. Adele looked at Eleanor and did not ask if she had been spared. She had seen enough nearest fits to stop expecting justice to sort itself cleanly. "It wrote your name," she said, just so the room wouldn't have to pretend otherwise. "It writes what the city will say to itself if we give it the sentence," Eleanor said. She touched the graphite smear on her thumb. "We will give it fewer." They made a procession of it because that is how humans stay standing. Eve carried the U. Andrew pocketed the empty paper packet like a souvenir of better manners. Father Hart walked ahead with his ring of keys. Eleanor held the case containing the shut book as if it were both infant and ordnance. Adele came last and carried only the intention not to film. In the sacristy, Father Hart opened the vault, a steel-fronted cabinet inside a brick alcove, its interior lined in with dark enough to look like a decision. He cleared a shelf of a box of altar cloths that could learn a different shelf. He set a pad of folded linen down the way one sets a bed for something you want to behave. Eleanor slid the book in, the clasp clicking softly against wood. Hart closed the door without a prayer. Then, thinking better of superstition, he locked it and kept his hand on the key for an extra beat. The room exhaled. Eleanor's phone vibrated, the lab's accelerometer pushing a tidbit to her screen. She read it. Electrostatic field dropped to baseline at bell plus 80 seconds. No further spikes. ***, she showed it to no one. "Thank you," she said to the people she had drafted into being brave. "Now we shut up." Adele gave a bleak little smile. "I can post about bakeries for a week," she said. "I can become an evangelist for muffins." "Saint Muffin?" Father Hart said gravely, and the joke was enough relief for everyone to remember their faces. Eleanor walked them out, signed her people off the cordon, thanked them in words that would not survive a transcript, and stood on the steps watching the square return to itself in increments. First the curious, then the indifferent. Somewhere, a drunk sang badly to a friend who did not deserve dedication. The city resumed its structural dishonesty. In the car, alone, she allowed the minute she had not permitted earlier. She thought of her name written in a script that behaved like polite blood. She thought of stairs and breath and stop. She thought of Mark Corin, and a woman with glass in her hair, and a tourist lifted from black water like an answer dragged back from a rhetorical question. She wrote stop in the margin of her notebook until the page looked guarded. Her phone registered a message from Sarka. "We're stripping the audio from the chapel cameras for the record. It's mostly bells and people proving they're alive. One odd thing, a low breath during the last toll. No word, just the muscle before one. ***. Eleanor typed back, breath is allowed. Words are rationed. Asterisk asterisk. Then she put the phone face down and let the car's quiet do its work. In the rectory, Father Hart stood alone by the cupboard where Grooves remembered wait. He touched the wood with 2 fingers and then made himself stop. Eve walked home empty-handed and lighter in a way that didn't feel like relief. Andrew made a note on a pad. Return what you can keep, crossed it out, and wrote keep what you can return instead. Adele drafted a post about the history of church bells and deleted it letter by letter until only the photo remained, no caption, no claim. The city slept as only cities do, tens of thousands of people agreeing not to speak at the same time. Somewhere a cat knocked over a glass and nobody wrote it down. At 1:07, in the vault, a lens watched the book not move. On the audio track, something like a breath, not loud, not language, stirred when the heating kicked on and the old wood decided to expand. The file wrote it as waveform and timecode, which is a kind of honesty. The clasp cooled into its brand. The U on the sacristy table decided to be only plant again. Eleanor closed her eyes in her parked car and believed, for 1 measured minute, that the mouth had been taught a shut. She opened them to the work that would follow. Formal orders, legal defenses for the silence, the memo about bell coordination, the request to the archdiocese for a longer loan of the vault. She started the engine. The city let her have that declarative. In the morning, the lab would label what had happened with words that did no harm. And somewhere in a forum comment thread, a stranger would try to reopen a sentence. Morning brought the kind of light that makes rooms admit their dust. Eleanor signed for the vault key from Father Hart, logged the hour, and stood before the steel door with the solemnity people reserve for machines that believe in their jobs. The clasped diary waited inside, a small darkness on folded linen. She didn't remove it. She set a sensor puck beside it, electrostatic, accelerometer, mic, and closed the door again. In the lab, they watched the live feed, a still life of denial. Sarka tuned the spectrometer to stare at nothing until nothing coughed. If it wants to write under the clasp, she said, we'll see attempt, spikes without script. Good, Eleanor said. We need to know if shut means shut. She convened a small, unwilling symposium in the witness room. Dispatch Supervisor Clara, Patrol Sergeant Radin, Dr. Vatchell, and a comms officer whose job was to teach verbs manners. On the wall, a whiteboard. On the table, a speaker tied to the vault microphone and a second tuned to the city's open radio channels. They put the word will on the board and drew a line through it. We're going to test language, Eleanor said. We'll describe facts on air and false scenarios in a dummy channel. We'll listen for the vault to flinch. We will not announce predictions. No one says a thing they might accidentally make true. Clara keyed a training frequency that never left the building and spoke with the unruffled tone of someone who had shepherded years of panic into order. Test 1. Present tense descriptions, she said. A street exists. Cars move. A woman walks her dog. The dog is brown. In the vault feed, the electrostatic line slept. Test 2, Clara said. Counterfactual declaratives. Off air. She read from a sheet that Eleanor had written herself in pencil. A tram will derail at 10:06. A man will fall at the embankment. A child will choke at a bakery. The vault remained a hospital monitor for the dead. Silence is not passive, Vatchell murmured, half to herself. It's an instrument. Test 3, Eleanor said. Live channel. We speak of fear we actually have. Then we shut up. Clara took a breath, and Eleanor watched the muscle work of it. We have a witness at the Charles Bridge, she said on the city net, neutral as weather. He is on the parapet. People are gathered. She stopped. Don't finish for him, Eleanor said softly. Let him. They listened as street mics fed a thin crowd sound. Shoes, cameras, the murmur that human throats make when they assemble hope. And then a woman, close to the pickup, whispered with the intimate cruelty of concern. He'll jump. In the vault, the electrostatic trace spiked, a clean, bright needle, and settled. No script formed. The clasp held its shut. But the book heard the word the city had offered itself. Copy units hold, Radin said on air, moving people where gravity couldn't. Do not narrate. Hands only. They heard shoes scuff stone. The practiced ballet of two officers turning a body away from a ledge without making him an object. No triumph on air, only present pulse, breath. The liturgy that keeps ink thin. Conclusion, Vatchel said, writing on the whiteboard with a pen that acted like chalk. The book harvests spoken certainty, not false declarations in vacuum. Witnessed confidence. Speech becomes script, Eleanor said. On a delay, the page seeks a nearest match to the mouth's decision. Sarka's graph printed the spikes from bridge whisper to vault twitch. The delay yesterday on our Vinohrady entry was 17 minutes from first visibility to completion, she said. Here the attempt registered within seconds of public certainty and then aborted. Because we shut the mouth, Eleanor said. She felt the strange, unsatisfying relief of preventing a death that wouldn't enrich a book. The clasp and the silence do their jobs. Together, the comms officer tapped his notes. We need a citywide syntax discipline, he said. Call takers trained to dodge will and going to. Public bulletins that describe risk instead of naming doom. Can you sell that to a mayor? I'll sell it to a coroner, Eleanor said. Mayors like numbers. Coroners have them. They pushed farther. In a controlled setting, with the vault watching them not watch it, Eleanor staged micro-scenarios. A plainclothes officer in the garage stepping onto a painted line while a partner, primed to be human, blurted he'll slip. A dispatcher reading the phrase a child will choke and then replacing it with food obstruction risk. A paramedic training to say present instead of stable when the temptation to predict pulled at the mouth. Each time a confident future escaped a throat, the vault twitched. Each time they buried the future in conditions, the vault rested. By noon, the whiteboard had become a grammar. Avoid future tense. Avoid absolutes. Avoid names until you must. Describe location, not destiny. Asterisk asterisk someone drew a mouth and put a padlock through it, artistic as a hungover saint. They broke for coffee. The city did not. The first leak oozed from a forum that collected rumors like old film posters collect dust. Someone posted a blurred still of the diary under the hood, red lines half seen through glare, and titled it Prague Killbook. The comments grew like mold. He'll run beneath a clip of a fleeing thief. Tram will jump rails at Letna. Blue will bleed again. Out of habit and hunger, the crowd wrote futures at the speed of attention. Not Adele, Eleanor said, scanning the thread. The usernames wore the fingerprints of aggregators and bored men. Her order had taken Adele's mouth, but the city had others. The vault graph responded small spikes, many. The clasp held. The page did not fill. It itched. Even without ink, you can make a body scratch, Vatchel said. We have to dampen the chorus. Eleanor sent the order she had drafted at 3 o'clock when courage is cheap and clarity is expensive. Temporary speech protocol citywide. Legal gave it a spine. The mayor's office gave it teeth in public, pretending it was about responsible communication in an emergency environment. Priests were asked to hold a minute of silence on the hour. Radio hosts were given a script full of maybe and could. Emergency operators posted notes on their monitors. Avoid will. Avoid must. Asterisk asterisk. What about influencers? Raiden asked dryly. Send them muffins, Father Hart said from the doorway. Unexpected, carrying a tray like a truce. He set them down and managed not to make it a sermon. Give them something to post that doesn't kill. The muffins were actually edible. The room ate like people who knew their hands would be needed again. The vault graph eased, a visual of bellies full and mouths occupied. It didn't last. At 14:06 a.m., video began to move through the feeds like a rumor with wheels. Adele's Bell photograph, no caption, no claim, had been stolen by a curation bot, overlaid with text in a font used by Recipes and Rage. Midnight, a door will open. Strangers, unburdened by orders, filled the comments. It'll be St. Ludmila. The cop will die on the stairs. Watch. By the time the clip reached people in other time zones, the word will had been conjugated into 100 dialects. Lock it down, Eleanor said, calling every favor in the building and a few outside it. Legal rallied takedown requests. A sympathetic platform throttled the hashtag for 12 blessed minutes. Old friends in newer uniforms asked moderators to scrub Will into might. It worked in patches. It never works completely. The vault line rose and fell like a panicked finch against glass. The clasp held its square jaw against the foredge and did the one thing it had been made to do. Keep. No writing, only want. At 16:30, Eleanor made a field test she had not planned. She took a small portable speaker, set it on the floor outside the vault, pressed play on a 10-minute recording of crowd noise, and stood with her hand on the steel. In the mix, a planted phrase, "He'll jump," said coolly by an actor with too much conviction. The steel under her palm hummed once. In the feed, the electrostatic spike jumped like a fish and slid down. "So it listens through doors," Sarka said. "Good to know. Better to close doors and mouths," Eleanor said. She killed the track and felt the quiet fall like a coat. By evening, the city had learned how to behave. Radio callers said maybe with the zeal of the newly catechized. A news anchor tripped over is likely to and laughed on air, and half the city laughed with her, which is a safer verb than most. The vault graph calmed and stayed calm long enough for everyone to discover they could keep coffee in cups. "Write the memo," Eleanor told Clara. "Permanent training. We keep this discipline even when the book gets bored." Clara nodded and began to draft the etiquette of not finishing. Eleanor walked a slow lap through the building. In the evidence corridor, she stopped at a window that only reflected her. She practiced, out loud but under breath, a sentence that said nothing and meant everything. "We do not say the last line." Her voice made a small climate. Her phone buzzed. It always did. The text was from media monitoring. No words, just a screenshot. Adele's account, a new post. No caption again. A photo of a river, winter gray. In the first 10 comments, 3 strangers had written, "He will." Eleanor didn't read the rest. She forwarded it to legal, to comms, to a tired friend at a platform who owed her from a flood year. "If Adele won't speak," she said to the room that didn't need to hear it, "the city will speak through her. The object doesn't care whose mouth. It cares that there is one." They kept at it. The afternoon became a chore of erasures and recipes. Replace will with might, shall with could, destined with at risk. A minor miracle. Call volume went down. ER intake charts recorded fewer accidents. Patrol logged fewer pushes that wanted to be falls. In the quiet, Eleanor walked back to the vault with Father Hart. They stood with their hands on the door like superstitious technicians. "He said once," Hart murmured, "that the book doesn't write the future. It writes the city's promise to itself. If you make fewer promises, fewer lines appear." "Then we'll keep our promises small," Eleanor said. "No vows the page can use." When she checked her watch, she realized time had practiced being ordinary for nearly an hour. The vault graph drew a line so flat it looked like a decision. Her phone broke it. "Sarka, heads up. External traffic is spiking on forums despite takedowns. Comment sections full of bold predictions." The diary, ***, she attached a still from the vault camera. Under the clasp, through leather and linen and resolve, the page had found a way to blush. Not letters, not yet. A pink underglow like blood trying to learn manners. "Pressure," Sarka said on the call. "Not script, but it wants." Eleanor looked at the wordless reddening trying to be a line and felt the old arithmetic move in her bones again. Speech plus ears equals ink. Ink plus city equals pressure. "Hold the silence," she said. "Widen it. Call the parishes. Call the stations. 1 minute on the hour wasn't enough. Give me 5. She hung up and started dialing the stupid, sacred list that makes a city resemble a choir. She didn't read comment sections. She starved them of air. Outside, bells rehearsed the shape of evening. Inside, a page tried not to write. As Adele's photo bloomed across other people's pages and strangers wrote will like a dare, the diary's blank pressed toward red the way a bruise rises. It hadn't found letters yet. It was learning them. The emergency injunction came down like a lid on a boiling pot. A judge with insomnia and a memory for fires read Eleanor's affidavit at 5:12 and signed a temporary gag order that walked a narrow bridge. No publication of images or text from the diary. No headlines naming Will in the same sentence as Prague and death. Platforms to throttle prophecy phrased as certainty. It wasn't pretty law. It was enough law. Clara at Dispatch turned the order into practice. Call takers taped cards to their screens. Describe, don't declare. No will. No must. Patrol sergeants briefed their teams at lockers that smelled like metal and old soap. The city's emergency band said present, at risk, tending verbs that leave room for mercy. At 6 o'clock, church doors opened on chill air and a quiet that wanted to be useful. Father Hart rang St. Ludmila's bells once and then held up his hand like a traffic officer for God. 5 minutes of silence at the top of each hour, all parishes who would, all stations who could. The city's lungs learned a rhythm. Breath, not speech, traveled by text and habit. By 9, the effect showed in numbers that didn't lie. ER admissions down. Incident calls softened at the edges. The vault's electrostatic trace flatter than any cardiologist would approve. The diary, clasped and bedded on linen, itched but did not write. Then at 9:47 the underflush returned, the blank page blushing with effort, as if the city had found a crack in its own discipline. It did not search. It worked. The red pushed up through the paper with a stubborn courtesy, letters rising around Eleanor's graphite barricade as if maneuvering furniture. On the monitor, the clerkly hand appeared one neat word at a time. A page returns to its owner. The end is ***. Stalled there, the dash a held breath. Owner, Sarka said softly. Not seller, not cop. Owner. Eleanor stood with her palms on the table, every finger a metronome. It means Malin, she said, or what stands in for him. The word returns made a rout in her head. Book to priest to vault. Final folio the only pilgrimage left. She called Father Hart. You said you could reach it, she said. The torn page. I can, he answered. It lives where a confessor keeps what he cannot confess. Bring it, she said. Do not tell it what it is on your way. He arrived half an hour later, hat in hand, envelope already in his coat breast like a relic that knew the body it rode. He set it on the lab table with the delicate guilt of a man who'd kept a secret to keep a city. Before you open it, Vatchel said, appearing without announcement, cardigan bristling with pens and worry. Decide what you are doing with it. You reunite a whole not to finish it but to close it. Say that to yourselves, not to the air. We reunite to shut, Eleanor said, and wrote stop in the margin of the lab worksheet for the comfort of her hands. They moved to the small chapel again. Practice had made it a workroom. The diary came out of the case and looked smaller each time, like a problem losing weight under a diet of rules. The clasp showed its little bronze jaw print in the leather, cross low, teeth discreet. The 5 of them, Eleanor, Sarka, Hart, Eve, Adele, stood in a ragged semicircle with pencils like modest candles. No microphones, Eleanor said. Vault feed only. No open channels. Sarka turned off everything that could listen badly. Father Hart opened the envelope. Inside lay a single folio rag cut, stub edge showing the neat tear of a binder who knew his craft. It was blank, not white, the same tired cream as its siblings, but blank in the way a buried mirror is blank. In the corner, the ghost of a penciled number, 225. It learned not to be obvious, Hart murmured. He kept it sealed because he feared its finish. Eleanor held the folio up to the light. No watermark, no hidden scrawl, just a page that acted like it could keep a promise. The entry upstairs is waiting for this to become true, Vatchel said. If the city says the page returns, the book will try to exhibit the statement until something makes it fail or succeed. We need to define success as closure. Breath, Eleanor said, touching the spine and then herself, like a private ritual against boasting. She pressed the folio against the inner backboard where the torn stub waited like a mouth that had remembered a tooth. With tweezers and old respect, she aligned fibers to fibers. The diary seemed to accept the reunion with a tiny change in posture you could only feel if you had carried it too much. The binding eased as if tension had remembered its opposite. Now the clasp, Eve said. She held the bronze with a potter's steadiness while Eleanor closed the cover. The little jaw bit the foredge again. The cross burned a shade deeper. The leather sighed. Andrew, summoned by text and contrition, stood just inside the door with his cap in his hands, silent as penance. They waited. The bells found 10 o'clock and considered ringing. Saint Ludmila held them 2 seconds longer than usual, a small rebellion that felt like affection. When the peal came, the sound layered through stone and wood with the relief of a muscle allowed to move. Under the clasp, the page tried to rise, and met the returned folio like a tongue meeting teeth. The writing at the lab monitor, the sentence with its open dash, quivered. A page returns to its owner. The end is ***, the dash lengthened, as if the system had discovered a paradox and was attempting politeness in the face of contradiction. The vault's electrostatic spike climbed and held like a climber who has decided the cliff must give first. "Hold your breath," Eleanor said, and then corrected herself, hearing Malin at her shoulder. Give breath. Hold words. They breathed, all of them, the chapel filling with air like a lung. The U lay across the lower margin where it liked to be useful. The graphite stop on the inside edge of the cover looked homely and brave. The clasp warmed and then stayed. On the monitor, the stalled sentence dimmed. Not erased. Abandoned. In its place, faint at first, then unmistakable, a single subdermal line drew itself with the patience of something that had all day. Confess. It did not write to anyone. It did not say what. It traced the imperative and left it there, like a command too general to empower harm. Confession is speech that refuses to perform, Father Hart said, softly awestruck by his own profession. If it wants confession, it wants truth that ends in silence. Eleanor watched the line until it stopped trying to be more. It can ask, she said. We don't have to answer. Sarka checked the vault graph. The line slid down from its plateau and rested on baseline like a heartbeat at peace. Electrostatics normalized, she said. No new attempts. Eve let out a breath that had been living in her since the first page turned red. Then we keep it shut, she said. We let the last page remain blank with instructions. Not blank, Adele murmured. It says confess. That's not a finish. That's a kind of door that leads inward. Doors that lead inward don't spill glass on strangers, Eleanor said. I like those better. They logged the reunion with a documentation that would bore anyone who hadn't lost sleep to this. Photographs of the folio's fibers matched to the stub like a forensic wedding. Hart's sworn statement of provenance. The chain of custody form neat enough to survive a century. Sarka's instrument readouts of a page that wanted and did not get. The city, for once, proved capable of apathy. The forum sputtered as takedowns accumulated and attention migrated to a football scandal and a broken water main. 5 minutes of silence each hour turned into a habit some would keep because it made their days taste better. In the afternoon, Eleanor walked the square without hurry. The sky had borrowed a new gray. A boy on a scooter practiced not falling. Somewhere a busker played a hymn against the will of his guitar. She stood at the church steps with her hands in her pockets and felt, weirdly, like a person who had put a lid on a mouth and discovered the lid did not mind. Back in the squad room, she wrote the brief for the mayor's office. Incidents reduced by 73% during speech dampening protocol. No new diary entries post-reunion. Recommendation. Retain syntax discipline in training. Coordinate bell silences during declared emergencies. Store object under reliquary clasp in parish vault per agreement. She wrote it in plain language and attached the one graph even politicians understand. The line descending. Stephen came in at 4 to give a statement that was more breath than record. He brought Mark's mug, washed and dried, to leave on Eleanor's desk without saying why he thought she should keep it. He told her, in a voice that turned now and then to gravel, about sentences rehearsed aloud, ideas that grow rounder when they meet air, and how he would try to love silence for a while like a person he'd misjudged. You saved someone, he said at the door. Not as a script, but as a fact that would exist whether or not any page enjoyed it. We made fewer words, she said. It was a team effort. At dusk, she walked with Father Hart to the vault one more time. He unlocked it with the reverence a priest gives metal when metal has behaved. The diary sat balanced on its folded bed, clasped steady, foliated whole. Through the leather Eleanor fancied she could see the faintest ghost of a line making a single demand of the air. Confess. I suppose that's better than continue, she said. Hart nodded. Confession is a sentence that retreats. It ends in a quieter room. Eleanor closed the vault and set her palm on the steel. Then we'll leave it to its quiet, she said. We'll keep ours. She stepped back into the nave where the last of the daylight made an argument with stained glass. She took out her notebook and, in the margin, wrote stop. Then, below it, just once, with the respect a person gives a word that has learned not to be hungry, she wrote confess and drew a box around it so it couldn't go anywhere without permission. Her phone buzzed. A final status from comms. Order holding. Leaks down. City is bored. Asterisk asterisk, she smiled in the small way cops do when boredom becomes a tactic. Night arrived one careful minute at a time. No page announced it. No mouth tried to finish its sentence. The book stayed shut. The bells rang on the hour and the city breathed in and out together, like a class learning how not to talk over itself. Paperwork is a kind of absolution if you do it slowly enough. Eleanor spent the next 2 days with a pen that refused to be dramatic, shepherding outcomes into boxes. Andrew Mallon sat opposite her in interview 2, sweater pilled where a nervous man picks at his own thread. He confessed to what the city already suspected. He had tried to sell the diary quietly to cover debts. He had loitered outside the shop to buy it back cheap when remorse found him. He had told 2 acquaintances that a priest's book that foretells things might be worth something, thinking gossip could float the price. He had not pushed anyone, not even the story, but he had fed it. He signed a statement with relief and shame in equal measure. The prosecutor took fraud and reckless endangerment. The court would take its inch and leave him his life. Adele North accepted a citation for incitement and a separate one for operating an unlicensed emergency advisory channel, a bureaucratic way of naming a conscience that had learned to text. She deleted her archive with a ceremony no one got to watch, locked her accounts, and bought a suitcase. In the station hallway, she gave Eleanor a look like a confession with the nouns removed. I'll stop telling stories for a while, she said. At least the kind that want to be right. Eleanor nodded and let her go without blessing or curse. Eve Sharp wrote her own confession in a hand that had learned neatness from ledgers. She had kept the clasp like a talisman. She had sent warnings like small, frightened sacraments. She had returned both and would obey silence as if it were a trade. She signed the transfer papers and physically carried the diary back to the Archdiocese vault with Eleanor and Father Hart walking beside her like flanking thoughts. The clasped small bronze jaw met the leather again. The vault door accepted its work without comment. Forensics closed their report with the honesty science owes to the world. No repeatable mechanism. Iron mobilized within rag paper under unknown stimulus. Heme-positive traces indistinguishable from layered, degraded donor noise. Microcapillaries aligning under cold pulses and resonance from bells. Writing completing within 17 minutes of times of death in 3 tested cases. Page attempts dampened by silence and by the clasp. Entries accelerating under conditions of widespread declarative speech. Conclusions. Speech shapes outcome. The object behaves like an amplifier for public certainty. Recommendation. Treat the city's mouth as a tool. Use carefully. A graph made the rounds. Incidents down 73% during the speech dampening protocol. ER admissions. Falls from height. Glass-related lacerations. Numbers obeying a tactic no budget line could name. The mayor blinked at the slide where Will was crossed out and asked communications to institutionalize that grammar thing. Clara at dispatch started training modules with a cat's satisfaction. Describe, don't declare became standard, laminated, and coffee-proof. In her office, Eleanor collected what remained of the case into a folder with a spine friendly to shelves. She tucked Mallon's notebook into the drawer she saved for the tools that weren't police issue. Chalk, a tiny flashlight with a personality, 3 pencils cut to soldier lengths. On the edge of active files, she drew a graphite line and wrote stop in letters that had no flourish. It wasn't magic. It was habit, and habit becomes law faster than most commandments. Stephen came by one last time. He carried nothing. He stood in the doorway and looked like a person ordering himself to remain a person. "I've been walking without rehearsing sentences," he said. "The city is quieter if you speak less at it." He paused. "I'll keep going to the river. It doesn't mean what it meant." "It rarely does," Eleanor said. She didn't offer comfort with hooks in it. "When you need words, choose the ones that won't become orders." He nodded and went to the place where mornings happen. At St. Ludmila, Father Hart learned to love the 5 minutes each hour as if they were a new hymn. Parishioners adapted. Some chewed their impatience like gum. Some closed their eyes as if brief sainthood could be performed with lids. The bells rang, and sometimes they didn't. The world failed to end in either case. On a Tuesday that had no particular right to be gentle, Eleanor and Hart opened the vault together to inspect the bedding. The diary lay inert on the folded linen like an old animal trusting sleep. The clasp had pressed its cross deeper into the leather, a brand choosing permanence. The returned final folio sat married to its stub as if no knife had intervened. Through steel and wood, the vault mic heard the same unremarkable breaths of an old building. Radiators considering work, boards remembering to expand and contract, the dry sibilance of real quiet doing its job. "Do we keep a watch?" Hart asked. "We keep a habit," Eleanor said. "Habits don't need cameras." Still, the camera remained. Superstition and prudence are often twins who share coats. It saw nothing worth a story. It heard, during the bell peals, the possibility of words that never finished their shapes, the pre-verbal gathering of a city that had learned to forgive itself the luxury of silence. It recorded time codes and decibels and fed them to a drive that would be thrown out in 12 months by policy no one had the courage to fight. In the final memo, Eleanor wrote what she could without inviting a sequel. Object secured. Discursive environment stabilized. Subjective risk reduced. ***, she waved off commendations and signed 2 minor disciplinary notes for officers who had narrated a chase into a prediction. Every system scolds what it loves. On a night with damp air and good reasons to go home, she stayed late, the station slowly dropping its shoulders one desk at a time. The river outside did the only job it has ever had. She walked the corridor with its yellow light and stood at the window that invented her reflection. There was no red script waiting in the glass to finish her. There was a woman looking back who had learned to be careful with verbs. She drove to the church and parked under a street lamp that sighed when it turned on. The square was almost empty. Even tourists must sleep. Inside, the nave held evening the way a palm holds water. She sat in the last pew and listened to what prove it was alive. In her pocket, her notebook lived its small life. She opened it and wrote stop in the corner. After a long minute that felt like permission, she wrote confess once, boxed it into a penitent square, and closed the cover so it couldn't wander. Father Hart found her there. He didn't ask if she was praying. "You have a look," he said. "Of a person who has put a lid on a mouth," she said. "For now." He nodded. "For now" is the truest tense. They checked the vault together as if the ritual needed 2 witnesses. The door swung on hinges grateful for oil. The diary did nothing. The clasp did its one beautiful job. On the monitor, the audio drew a line at the threshold of hearing. During the hour's last bell, the mic caught a breath, not a word, moving the way a city's lungs move when it refuses to say what might become a script. "Confession is available," Hart said, like a shopkeeper offering a modest good. "We'll keep it private," Eleanor said. She locked the vault. He turned off the light. They left the book to its quiet, the church to its stone, the city to its manners. Outside, a taxi signaled the way a creature flicks a fin. A woman crossed the square with a loaf of bread under her arm and the ordinary bravery bread demands. Glass stayed glass. Stairs remained stairs. The future, for once, declined to finish its sentence. And so, listeners, the pages fall silent. For now. We've followed Detective Eleanor Vale through Prague's haunted streets, where words themselves can kill and silence becomes the only salvation. The ledger of tomorrow's sins has closed, its last entry refusing to finish, leaving us with a single command that belongs to all of us. Confess. Thank you for joining us tonight on Somnolent Conspiracies, where every whisper might be a verdict and every silence a reprieve. Your time and attention are the lifeblood of these stories, We could not walk these shadowed corridors without you. If you felt the weight of this tale, if the bells of St. Ludmilla still echo in your chest, please subscribe, ring the notification bell, and leave a like. Share it with those who walk too close to the river at night, or those who still believe paper is harmless. Every small gesture keeps our conspiracies breathing, keeps the silence intact, and keeps us searching for the next truth the world tried to bury. Until then, sleep lightly, speak carefully, and remember, some stories end only when you stop telling them. Thank you and good night.